Chapter 723. The city of Mordor was changing rapidly. However, after Sauron arranged the third expansion plan, he began to busy himself. The city hall of Mordor had long been able to operate on its own. Compared with the efficiency of other places in the current era, the city hall had an absolute advantage in terms of execution. Anyway, as long as it was something that Sauron told them to do their best, it didn't matter if they didn't understand some things. They just had to act according to the orders, and they would naturally know why in the future. The city of Mordor had always been ruled by an absolute dictatorship. Is this the crack that connects to the bottomless abyss? Gloria and Fallen, which were busy reorganizing the elemental furnace. Sauron also needed to arrange the overall layout of Mordor at this time. A key part of it was this passage that connected to the bottomless abyss. Most of the dangers that Mordor would face in the future would come from here. It was not realistic to close this plain crack because it would take a lot of divine power to close it. It was also possible that the plain crack would reappear in other places. So what Sauron had to do now was to make the nearby defense more stable. Outside this valley, there was already an elite legion of Mordor. The interior of the valley was full of dense plants. These plants had covered the entire bottom of the valley through magic. Any living thing that approached here might be attacked by them. There was a strong smell of blood near the plain crack, and the cannibal plants in that area were also the most luxuriant. The mutant plants in the outer islands were very dangerous. It was mentioned before coming to the island of Mordor that many mutant plants had a high challenge level. Some were even more difficult than intermediate demons. Saruman had recultivated these mutant plants. It seemed that he had secretly cooperated with some people in the Church of Agriculture. Sauron did not ask about the specifics, but it seemed that some people in the Church of Agriculture were also very interested in these plants. The finished products were these plants in front of him. Initial estimation of the challenge difficulty was about level 5. Some of them had undergone a second evolution mutation. The power of the demon's blood had penetrated their roots. By absorbing the nutrients of the demon's corpse, these plants had become more dangerous and aggressive. But this was not enough. Sauron was going to further strengthen their abilities and use these plants to block the invasion of the demons. At least they would not be able to leave the valley easily. Plant domain. A powerful domain power spread out and enveloped the entire valley in an instant. Sauron hadn't used the plant territory he got from the Misty Forest yet because he didn't have much use for it. However, he could use it to strengthen these mutant plants. Divine power bestowal. Sauron's divine power was slowly decreasing. At the same time, the plants in the valley were mutating and strengthening. While they were affected by the plant domain and receiving Sauron's divine power, their original imprints were erased, which was the magic imprints left by Saruman to control them. Instead, they were replaced by the divine imprints left by Sauron's plant domain on these mutant plants. Sauron sprinkled his divine power on the mutated plants. If he needed it, he could even observe the valley from their perspective. He didn't have much divine power to waste. Sauron used about 50 divine power and stopped. His focus was on the mutated plants around the gap between the planes. After Sauron's plant domain and divine power bestowal, the strength of the mutated plants near the front had greatly increased. At least the challenge had doubled. As more demons were killed, the bloodline power and evil breath from the bottomless abyss were likely to further transform these mutated plants into demonic plants. They would be the first line of defense of Mordor. After dealing with some miscellaneous things, Sauron also had an important thing to do. With the appearance of a teleportation spell, Sauron's figure appeared directly in the laboratory of the Shadow Plane. In front of him was a busy Fallen Witch, and Gloria was in the laboratory on the other side, disassembling the golem puppets that had mastered the ability of their specialty. Is the thing I want ready? Sauron glanced at the busy Fallen Witch and said slowly, I'm ready here. Fallen Witch raised her head when she heard the words. She seemed to have not rested for a while, so she looked a little tired. She nodded and said, It's done. It's on the alchemy table over there. I'll help you install it later. Sauron nodded, then waited quietly. An hour passed in the blink of an eye. After Fallen Witch finished the work at hand, she waved her hand and put away a silver-white metal ring on the alchemy table. Then she said to Sauron, Where is it? Did Gloria bring the drawing? Sauron took out a drawing. It was a battleship. There were many complicated marks at the bottom of the cabin and the sails, as well as a spell model that made people dizzy. Very good design. This should be enough. Fallen Witch's figure floated in the air and she said softly, Let's go now. It should be ready by tonight. The light of a teleportation spell rose. Soren and Fallen, which appeared on the sea near the city of Mordor. When Fallen, which nodded to Soren to signal that they could start, the sea under their feet gradually separated. Then a dark mast rose from the bottom of the sea, followed by the ghost ship, Dead Man's voice breaking out of the waves. With a fog spreading, the legendary ghost ship that had been silent for a long time reappeared. Killing made the Dead Man's voice stronger. But this transformation also took time because Soren was almost invincible on the sea now. Unless they provoked the sea goddess, no enemy dared to fight with him at sea. The ghost ship, Dead Man's voice, had temporarily lost its purpose, and it had not been needed to join the battle for a long time. During this time, the ghost ship, Dead Man's voice, had been silent on the bottom of the sea, digesting the death power absorbed during the killing, and at the same time, digesting the ghosts attached to the ship. Now it was a true legendary specter ship. I'm starting. I may need your help later. Fallen Witch's figure flashed, and she appeared directly on the deck of the ghost ship. She first looked at the legendary ghost ship curiously, then she waved her hand and took out a silver-white metal ring. Floating ring. It was a medium-sized floating ring customized according to Soren's request. Soren had always been a person who was used to being well prepared. After a long time of accumulation, it was finally time to apply it. It was still impossible to raise a floating space tower for the time being. Gloria and Fallen, which had to complete all the research work on the elemental furnace and figure out the stable energy transmission method. But since the research on the floating ring had been completed, the next step was to apply it in practice. There was no doubt that the ghost ship, Dead Man's voice, was definitely the most suitable application at present. First of all, the ghost ship itself had enough energy. It could provide energy for the floating ring on its own, and when necessary, it could also strengthen the kinetic energy through other devices. Moreover, there were ghosts on the ghost ship, and they could all provide the power to maintain the operation of the floating ring. Then the ghost ship itself was not big, and its weight was within the range of the floating ring. From all aspects, the ghost ship, Dead Man's voice, was the most suitable tool for testing the floating ring. If a legendary ghost ship was successfully modified and equipped with the floating ring, then its combat effectiveness would really be a bit different. The ghost ship had a strong offensive ability. The ghost ship had bound a large number of undead creatures. The Dead Man's voice was a legendary construct. The ghost ship could repair its body by itself. Now, as long as a floating ring was added, and then the sails were re-enchanted, then the Dead Man's voice could fly. Flying Dead Man's voice. This was Soren's purpose. In order to let the impatient Gloria draw him the enchantment blueprint to modify the ghost ship, Soren even worked hard last night. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but in Gloria, who was addicted to research, Soren always seemed to see the shadow of the fallen witch. So last night he was unexpectedly excited for some reason. Thinking about it made him feel a little guilty. Time ticked by. The figure of the fallen witch shuttled through the cabin of the ghost ship. As the floating ring was placed little by little on the ghost ship, the whole warship gradually rose, and the depth of the hull was getting smaller and smaller. When it reached a critical point, the ghost ship suddenly shook, and then the whole ship was suspended about a meter above the sea. The floating ring has been installed. The figure of the fallen witch reappeared, raised her hand to lift a strand of her long hair and whispered, "But the control system is not completed yet. When the hull is out of the water, it can only rely on the wind to sail. The sail enchantment blueprint given by Gloria is limited. The ghost ship itself needs an autonomous driving force. If you want to control it freely, I'm afraid you need to carve a huge magic circle inside the hull. This will take a lot of time and energy." The floating ring only offset the influence of gravity on the ghost ship, and other aspects of control still needed the support of other alchemy. This was the same for the floating space tower. But now that the most important part had been completed, it was only a matter of time to get the other things done. Flying Dead Man's voice. Although it was not completely completed yet, Soren's goal had been achieved. Chapter 724. The Flying Dead Man's Voice. Since the initial transformation of the Spectre ship had been completed, Soren naturally needed to test its ability. In his future plans, the Dead Man's Voice had a rather important task. There were not many places in the material plane that could use the Dead Man's Voice, but in other planes, especially in the Abyss, there were many places that needed the Dead Man's Voice. Because there were a large number of waters in the Abyss, and some waters even covered several levels, such as the territory of the demon lord, Dagon, and the Blood Sea ruled by the goddess of Doom. Of course, the most important point was that the Spectre ship, Deadman's Voice was a type of undead construct. It could sail on the Styx. Just being able to sail on the Styx was already worth Soren spending a lot of time and energy to transform it. In the lower planes, there was something that could never be avoided called the Styx. Since the beginning of the ancient era, when the first generation of the ancient gods of heaven broke out in the war with the Chaos demons, until the birth of the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, the existence of the Styx had already spread all over the lower planes. From the scorching hell to the Shura realm, from the grey wilderness to the distorted nether, from the abyss to the Bator Inferno, the tributaries of the Styx were all over the lower planes, and even the upper planes could occasionally see traces of the Styx. It had long grown into a very important part of the multiverse, and now no one could ignore the existence of the Styx. Rise to the sky. Soren's figure fell on the Deadman's Voice. With the activation of the energy of the floating space ring, the Spectre ship gradually rose until it rose to a height of nearly 3,000 meters. The higher it rose, the greater the influence of the wind. Soren understood why the Fallen which said that the ship needed a power source. After all, a Spectre ship was still inferior to a floating space tower and a floating space city. There was a huge gap between the two in terms of quantity. The floating space tower could install far more things than the Spectre ship, and the floating space tower itself was equivalent to a defensive fortress when it was made. At this time, the attributes of the Spectre ship, Deadman's Voice, had become like this. Creature name, Legendary Spectre ship, Flying Deadman's Voice, Mutated Undead Construct, Legendary Undead Construct. Creature type, Activated Spectre ship. Creature description, this is a battleship that sank hundreds of years ago. It woke up at the bottom of the sea. The dead souls and vengeful spirits gradually assimilated with it, turning it into a ghost ship that roams the sea. There were many legends about it. In the end, it attracted the attention of the followers of the goddess of ocean. The legendary priests captured these ghost ships, and then secretly activated these ghost ships into low-level undead life forms under the divine power of the goddess of ocean. It had a simple consciousness and could recover itself like the undead. This ghost ship could sail in any sea, and its power was terrifying in the sea. Note, slaughter and death made it evolve, and the transformation of the legendary which gave it the ability to fly. Captain, Soren. Sailors, drowned undead, 108 people. Sea vengeful spirit, 36 people. Sea ghost, 270 people. Naga siren, 36 people. Undead shark, 27 people. Bound spirit of the dead, 2,705 people. Locked. Equipment, drowning howl ram. Cannon of the dead, 24 pieces. Ghost sail, mutated, enchanted, transformed. Heavy revolving cannon, 2 pieces. Basic skills, fly, drive wind, summon fog. Ghost ship's characteristics, self-repair. Deep sea diving, activate life, activate ropes. Curse ship hull, Deadman's characteristics. Special ability, Soul Eater, characteristics. The Deadman's Voice was stronger because of the slaughter. This ghost ship's life form was relatively special. Even if it had advanced to the legendary level, its ability to strengthen itself was relatively limited. To some extent, it was just a collection of undead. Advancing to the legendary level strengthened the undead bound on it. The ship itself did not change much, but it slightly strengthened a part of the ship's ability. The number of souls bound on the Deadman's Voice had doubled compared to the past. The number of drowned undead had reached an astonishing 108 people. The number of sea vengeful spirits had also skyrocketed. The number of other types of undead had more than doubled, and some had even doubled or tripled. This was where the ghost ship, Deadman's Voice, truly changed. Among them, the number of bound spirits of the dead had reached an astonishing 2,705 people. These bound spirits of the dead determined the vitality and healing ability of the ghost ship, as well as the potential of the other undead sailors. It could be said that the ghost ship had now become a small undead kingdom. It's still not enough to rely on the sail. It still needs to be further enchanted. Soren controlled the ghost ship to fly in the sky and then return to the sea. He murmured, "It's still not enough to deal with the battle in the abyss. The flying ability is enough. The floating ring can rise to a height of thousands of meters with just a little push. But the maneuverability is seriously lacking. I don't know how the floating city in the Arcane Empire was powered. Then there's the combat ability. Although the number of undead sailors has skyrocketed, they are only close combat cannon fodder. The Silent Howl's ram can be ignored, and the animated ropes can also be ignored. The only effective long-range firepower is the cannons and the heavy boomerangs. This kind of firepower can be used to deal with enemies in the material plane, but it's not enough to deal with the demons in the abyss. When the Sea Temple first modified it, it was already limited to the battle in the material plane. It seems that all the cannons have to be replaced? I wonder if the Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon can be installed on the Ghost ship? If it can be installed, how will the huge amount of energy needed be solved? A lot of thoughts flashed through Soren's mind. But in the end he shook his head and put it down. Things still had to be done step by step. If he wanted to get the Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon, he was afraid that he had to take down the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane first. To take down the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane, Gloria had to master the level 9 spell, Spirit World Travel. Gloria was now busy studying the Elemental Furnace. She already wanted to split herself into 2 people to use it. At this time he could only deal with things according to priorities. From the current point of view, reassembling the Elemental Furnace was the most important thing and the most helpful thing for them. As long as the Elemental Furnace was assembled, the abundant energy would immediately allow the city of Mordor to build a golem army. By then, with enough diamond golems, they would be able to push down the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane. The city of Mordor was busy. The third expansion plan also included the port area. With the increasing number of foreigners, the upper limit of the number of people that could be accommodated in Port Mordor was a little insufficient. Recently, the City Hall was preparing to open up a separate piece of land as a residential area. Citizens of Port Mordor could buy a small piece of land at a relatively low price with their own identification. However, if foreigners wanted to buy a house in Port Mordor, it would be a little more expensive. It was said that many southern businessmen had protested recently, but the officials of the City Hall didn't even care about them. If you don't want to buy it, then get out. The land budget of Mordor was already very tight, and the population growth rate was far faster than other cities. This batch of land was already in overdraft of the reserve resources. According to the final statistics of the City Hall, if the nearby islands were not annexed and developed, the population of Mordor could only be accommodated by about 300,000 people. Once this scale was exceeded, the food could no longer be self-sufficient. Citizenship in Mordor was now in high demand. Having the citizenship of Mordor was greatly convenient at sea, and there were few difficulties in other cities on the south coast. Powerful force was the guarantee of peace. The Battle of the Golem was completely over, but Soren's journey did not stop. Before history changed too much, he needed to use his ability to foresee the future to prepare more trump cards for himself. But before he set off this time, he still had some small things to deal with. The Stone of Dreams. This thing was basically useless to Soren, Gloria, Fallen Witch and Vivian. As a relatively special legendary item, Soren seemed to be able to use it in only one place, that was the War Chest Demi-Plane connected to the Shadow Plane Wizard Tower. The magical virtual illusion of the War Chest Demi-Plane. A very realistic illusion that Soren still couldn't understand. Because he had made a lot of breakthroughs in the Wizard Tower, he didn't have time to waste on the War Chest Demi-Plane for the time being. The demigod Thaling was not easy to deal with. It was too time-consuming to break through the War Chest Demi-Plane. Soren planned to take over the authority of the War Chest Demi-Plane directly after taking over the Wizard Tower, but now he needed to test whether the Stone of Dreams was effective against the illusion of the War Chest Demi-Plane. The Frost Kingdom. Arendelle. The palace. The tall figure of Princess Royal stood on the balcony at the top of the palace, overlooking the whole country. The arrival of the Avatar crisis did not have much impact on this prosperous and wealthy country. And all this was due to the powerful strength of Princess Royal. Her power sheltered Arendelle, so that all evil forces did not dare to easily set foot in this land. Arendelle. Mordor City. The 2 cities in the north and south were one of the few peaceful paradises in the material plane. These 2 places could still maintain their original state after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, mostly because their rulers had powerful forces. Princess Royal. Soren. Many forces secretly guessed that the 2 had joined forces to form some kind of alliance, and no one dared to provoke them easily. Your Majesty. The emissary of the Northern Witch Council has arrived. The head maid of the palace appeared not far away and said respectfully, I have arranged for them to stay. I wonder when your Majesty plans to see them? The eldest princess nodded when she heard this and said lightly, I know. Arrange it for tomorrow. History was quietly changing. Because of the relationship with Soren, the Northern Witch Council also formally established diplomatic relations with Arendelle. The 2 sides didn't have much to do with each other, but now the Northern Witch Council and Arendelle's Snow Witches seemed to have plans to further deepen their relationship because of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. The 2 most powerful witch groups in the material plane were trying to cooperate. Chapter 725. The Northern Witch Council. Arendelle's Ice Witches. The two originally didn't have much interaction. Although Princess Royal had great strength, she was very arrogant in terms of interpersonal relationships. You could feel it from her attitude towards Soren. If it weren't for the close relationship between Soren and the Northern Witch Council, and the Northern Witch Council sent a delegation to Arendelle, perhaps Princess Royal might not be willing to take the initiative to contact them. There was no other way. Princess Royal had always been like this. The Northern Witch Council was a relatively formal wizard organization, and its internal organizational structure was comparable to the Wizard Alliance. In contrast, Arendelle's Ice Witches were slightly worse. Because of their special bloodline, there were many female warlocks in Arendelle. Many of them were members of the royal family or members who inherited the bloodline of the warlock family. 1/3 of the Ice Witches were warlocks, and many of them were born with the ability to control ice and snow. This should be a family trait. Perhaps it was overshadowed by Princess Royal's brilliance. The outside world had never understood much about the Ice Witches. They only knew that Arendelle had a very powerful royal witch council. The eldest princess could more or less guess the purpose of the Northern Witches' diplomatic mission. Compared to the closed environment of the Frost Kingdom, the territory controlled by the Northern Witches was much more complicated. This meant that after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the problems they faced had increased a lot. First, there was the rebellion of the Lizardmen. The outbreak of the flood last year had affected the present. The Lizardmen's attacks on humans had not been completely eradicated, and the Witch Council was temporarily unable to clean them up because the false god that the Lizardmen served seemed to have made a move. Then there was the Church of the Lady of Poison. In order to expand her influence in the mortal world, the plague spread by the Lady of Poison had stopped. However, traces of the Witherers still frequently appeared in the north of the continent. To deal with the Church of an evil god, even the Northern Witch Council did not dare to act rashly. Other than that, with the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, resources were increasingly scarce. There was also a rebellion near Deepwater City. The low-level civilians were restless, and the evil forces of the outside world were eyeing covetously. If it weren't for the financial assistance from the city of Moder, the Northern Witch Council would have been in chaos. The large number of orders from the city of Mordor greatly eased the financial crisis of the Northern Witch Council, and also provided opportunities for lower-class civilians to work to support themselves. Moreover, the close relationship with the city of Mordor also made many enemies who were secretly spying on them not dare to act rashly. However, Mordor City was still far away in the sea after all. If something big really happened, even if Soren wanted to help, he wouldn't be able to react in a short time. Therefore, the Northern Witch Council needed a powerful ally nearby. At this time, there were not many candidates in the eyes of the Northern Witches. First of all, the allies they chose could not have too complicated relationships. Too complicated relationships meant that there were many potential enemies. While gaining a powerful ally, the Northern Witch Council may also have new and more dangerous enemies. At this time, Arendelle, who was relatively isolated, was included in their list of priorities. The situation of Arendelle was special. First of all, it was a relatively isolated country. It didn't have much contact with the outside world, and there were not many enemies on the table. It was not far from the Northern Witch Council. Then, the relationship between Arendelle and the city of Mordor was very close. At least in the outside world, Princess Anna of Arendelle was said to be the lover of His Excellency Soren. Even recently, there were rumors that Her Majesty Princess Royal had a very close relationship with His Excellency Soren. Regardless of whether these gossipy rumors were true or false, there was no doubt that Arendelle had a close relationship with the city of Mordor. Arendelle, the city of Mordor, the Northern Witch Council. After realizing that they needed more powerful allies, the Northern Witch Council finally decided to send a delegation to Arendelle. The leader was even a legendary witch who held power within the Witch Council. The city of Mordor was still too far away. Soren chose the outer islands in order to avoid the direct impact of the storm of catastrophe. In this increasingly chaotic environment, the Northern Witch Council must form an offensive and defensive alliance with a nearby powerful force. Outer Islands, the city of Mordor. In just a few days, the city of Mordor had undergone earth-shaking changes. There were large construction sites everywhere outside the city. Strong men who worked by the sea all year round carried tools with their bare arms. Slogans sounded one after another at the construction site, and many women also joined in the labor. The mysterious wizards did not seem to be so rare. At least they could be seen in many construction sites. Compared to ordinary people with low education, The amount of knowledge that spellcasters had was far beyond their imagination. This kind of knowledge was not only reflected in spells, but also in architecture, culture, nature, religion, and so on. Naturally, the wizards were not likely to do it themselves. They were more like the general supervisors of the project. Recently, the higher-ups of the city of Mordor wanted them to develop something similar to cement. This was really a bit troublesome for the wizards who were used to relying on the mud-to-stone spell, but after all, the spell could not be applied to such a large-scale construction, so in the end, Saruman had to lead a team to try it. The level of architecture in this world was about equivalent to the Middle Ages, but if you want to make cement, you have to consider the different rules of the world. Making it was not the key. Wizards had many alchemy creations that could replace cement, but those could only be applied to expensive buildings like wizard towers. The most important thing was that this alchemy creations could be mass-produced and popularized, which was the result that the higher-ups of the city of Mordor wanted to see. Looking down at the city of Mordor from the sky, a huge ring could be seen, which was composed of the city of Mordor, Port Mordor, and 12 towns that were being expanded. Every place had a landmark building, which was the temple of the half-elf church. The great temple in the central square was the core. This was actually a very large magic circle, with Sauron's belief network as the core, relying on the great temple in the city of Mordor as the carrier, and the temples in the other 12 towns as branches. It was also an independent small network that connected the beliefs of the half-elf church. This was actually a magic circle. The wizard's in-depth understanding of the magic network finally gave birth to the powerful magic circle. Magic circle. The magic circle was like an independent local area network. In some powerful magic circles, the controller could even seal the casting ability of others. Was this not very similar to the magic network? If the goddess of magic deprived a wizard of his ability to cast spells, the effect would be the same. The magic circle was first born in the age of thorium. From the beginning, it was the result of the analysis of the structure of the magic network by the great arcanists. If there were not always a few great arcanists who wanted to kill the goddess of magic, perhaps the goddess of magic would not be so eager to close the inner layer of the magic network and only open the core application of the magic network to other gods. Magic circle was one of the core structures of the floating city. The wizard tower in the shadow plane was covered with a small magic circle. It seemed that the former owner of the wizard tower also wanted to expand to the level of the floating city. This was equivalent to a local area network. The deeper the understanding of the magic network, the more powerful the user was, and the more amazing the magic circle's ability was. During the Arcane Empire, the most famous floating cities could even directly block the casting ability of all wizards below the legendary level. Once they entered the floating city with the magic circle, they would become similar to ordinary people. Only after obtaining the casting license, local area network pass, issued by the Arcanist Council of the floating city, these people could regain the ability to cast spells in the floating city. Note, this is why it is called magic circle. This is a lock. Incredible, right? This was actually the magic circle that was mentioned more than once in the wizard books. Anti-magic field. However, at present, there was no magic circle of this level in the material plane. They had been lost for a long time. When Sauron first designed the distribution of the town, he divided the location according to a specific law. The location of the temples in each city was specially calculated. When these temples were all built, they would form a connection with the great temple in the central square of the city of Mordor. 12 was a very special number. These 12 temples formed the core part of the magic circle that had not yet fully formed on the city of Mordor. At present there was almost no abnormality. The role of the temples and magic circle was only to regulate the climate of the island of Mordor. With the help of Sauron's priesthood, faith and divine power, this huge magic circle formed an invisible protective barrier, making the climate of the city of Mordor smoother. But when it was really formed, then the magic circle in front of him had a very terrible power. The Northern Witch Council had a magic circle. This labyrinth was found in the ruins of Silvermoon City. It took hundreds of years for the Northern Witch Council to restore the labyrinth with the power of everyone. Then it relied on the power of the wizard tower to rebuild the labyrinth. It was actually the same thing over the city of Mordor. The person in charge of the whole magic circle was the leader of the half-elf church, the high priest appointed by Sauron. The role of the 12 temples was equivalent to replacing the wizard tower. Each temple was personally supervised by her. This was a magic circle built with the temple as the foundation instead of the wizard tower. The third phase of the project of Mordor was also to serve this huge, magic circle. Soren's third phase of expansion was a plan for the whole island, and this plan was to make it easier to perfect the magic circle in the following arrangements. What he was doing now was like flattening the island like a piece of paper, then drawing according to his will on this flat piece of paper. The 12 shrines were only the fulcrum of the entire framework on the paper, and what he needed to do next was to fill in the rest of the empty space. Earth, water, wind, fire. The whole island was in a very grand blueprint, and now the layout had just been completed. Chapter 726. Time passed quietly like this. The city of Mordor was constantly changing, and bad news came back from the mainland one after another. Soren was preparing to go to the Eastern Kingdom to explore the girl who accidentally summoned her demon avatar to the material plane last time, which was the temple that the demon avatar found in the desert area when the accident happened some time ago. Soren felt the breath of death in this temple. If it was really a temple left by a fallen god of death, maybe he could find the mystery related to the realm of death. Even if he couldn't do that, anything related to death would still be of great value. Slaughter and death. A long time ago these two were originally connected, and there was a god of slaughter among the 3 gods of death. However, before leaving, Soren still had a little thing to deal with. South Coast, Windspear Hills. This land originally belonged to the descendants of the Isabella family, but there was a slight accident some time ago, and the main members of the family died in the attack of the evil Nagas. This caused the direct bloodline to almost be cut off. Finally, after various reasons, especially some external interference, the heir of the territory became a woman. Adele Isabella. Some forces in the dark already knew who was standing behind this woman, but not many people dared to stand up because that person was a shadow hanging over the south coast, and no one dared to anger him easily. Because he was Soren. Mordor City needed a tentacle to extend into the mainland. Establishing the base in the outer islands did not mean completely abandoning the mainland. Many of the resources Soren needed had to be obtained from the mainland. This could not be done in Port Tylon. Since the rise of Mordor City, the role of the Sea Temple for Mordor City had become less and less, and Soren could not directly compete with the Sea Goddess for territory. The City of Wealth was the lady's private land, and the hand of Mordor City could not reach too far, which would easily cause the lady's dissatisfaction. Excluding these 2 places, there were only Snake Island, Raging Sand Island, and Shipwreck Bay left. Snake Island was just a transit station near the coast, so it could basically be eliminated. Raging Sand Island was in charge of the eastern trade route and was far from the mainland. Shipwreck Bay was one option, but there were too many people there and there were too many forces there. Many churches of gods were also there. Soren did not want to cause too much hostility, so he had to give up on this place. After eliminating these places, there were not many choices left. The Windspear Hills had always been part of Soren's plans. He had even started planning for this place a long time ago. Adele Isabella was in charge of this place, all from Soren's hands. The Windspear Hills wasn't a large piece of land. However, there was also a convenient place here it could directly lead to the north. The intelligence organization of Mordor City had already spread here. 1/3 of the wanderers of the half-elf church had been sent here. This wanderer priesthood was a convenience. In addition to training priests, Soren's church was also constantly training rogues. The Avatar crisis broke out. The Windspear Hills were also affected, but because of the interference of the power of Mordor City, the Windspear Hills was not affected much by the abyssal demons. At least the loss of population in towns was very small, and only a few villages were destroyed. But the biggest problem with the Avatar crisis was more than that. The weakening of the plane barrier not only allowed the demons of the abyss to enter, but also creatures from other lower planes could enter the material plane. Ordinary things were naturally dealt with by others. Even if it was a small matter that could attract Soren's attention, it was also extraordinary. As a god, if it was not a legendary event, he would not send it to Soren's hands. It happened about 3 days ago. There was a village on the edge of the Windspear Hills with a population of about 800 people. Because of the remote location, the villagers were tough. The village had retired adventurers and its own militia. Even if such a village was attacked by a small group of demons, it could rely on its own ability to survive. But just 3 days ago, someone suddenly found that there was no living person in the village. The whole village was full of corpses. The strangest thing was that most of these people committed suicide. Suicide. That's right. This was the problem and the reason why it was sent to Soren immediately. There might be something else to mention here. Because of the particularity of the soul and the rules of the multiverse, suicide was not allowed in any god's church. Even many good gods thought that suicide was a serious crime. This was related to the kingdom of the gods. It could not be explained in a few words, but to put it simply, the souls of people who committed suicide would be affected. This kind of soul was not good enough or not good enough to enter the kingdom of the gods. Many gods even refused to accept the souls of those who committed suicide. That was it in a nutshell. There was also something like redemption, but there was no need to talk about it here. The souls of those who committed suicide will fall into hell. Of course, this was not a joke. In fact, according to the rules of the multiverse, more than 90% of people who ended their lives by suicide would fall into the Bot or Inferno. This was also why in many evil rituals secretly controlled by the devils, there would be people who would end their lives by suicide. This was a more mysterious realm of the soul. It might need Soren to enter the kingdom of the gods to figure it out, because the speculation in the mortal world was that the souls of those who committed suicide could not meet the requirements of the kingdom of the gods. Of course, a group of people committing suicide was not the strangest thing because some powerful devils could also do this. Often, these devils would return to the Bot or Inferno after harvesting the souls. Many gods' churches in the material world were watching these guys. Because pantheism was a common thing, these souls that were harvested by the devils belonged to the believers of many gods' churches. The reason why the subordinates immediately reported this to Soren was that these suicides all had a smile on their faces, and they ended their lives with a seemingly twisted and chilling expression of happiness. It made people commit suicide with a happy face. Soren immediately attracted attention after receiving this news, because in his memory, there were very few people who could do this. One of them was called the Hell Bard. Wind Spear Hills, Withered Leaf Village. Soren's figure appeared near this village that was shrouded in the smell of death and stench. Long before the news was sent to him, the secret sentries in Motor City had already begun to monitor this place. The civilians in the village had been dead for a while, and there was a strong smell of corpses everywhere. However, the strange thing was that there weren't any crows or scavengers in sight. Strange, right? Crows, vultures, coyotes, and other scavengers like to eat corpses. There were hundreds of corpses here, but no scavengers appeared. They just rotted over time. The devil's means. Soren opened his eyes, and a divine light appeared in his eyes. The village in front of him was covered in a blood-red aura. It was an extremely evil power. The power of the devil. There were no souls. Even if the spirit world and the shadow plane were seen through the barrier, Soren did not find any souls. There were only corpses that were gradually rotting. Not even a shadow of a vengeful spirit could be seen. The devil had harvested all the souls. Is it death's praise? Soren looked down at the corpses under his feet. These corpses still had a strange smile on them. In the center of the village there was a destroyed altar. There were many naked corpses nearby. They had held a ceremony before they died. A ceremony that looked happy and beautiful, but in fact, it was extremely evil. This is? Musical instrument. Soren's figure fell from mid-air. He found a flute on the ground. Next to it was a young man. He should have been playing the flute before he committed suicide. There were other musical instruments not far away. Maybe they were holding some kind of celebration before all this happened. It seems to be the work of the Helpheimer. As the most powerful bard in the material plane, the Helpheimer had mastered some special and terrible chanting spells. Before he fell, he was a powerful chanter. His famous work was when a large number of believers committed suicide during a celebration. Revelation, Prelude to Hell. Dusk Tribute, Death's Praise. Among the terrible abilities that the Helpheimer had, there were too many spells that could do this. He's back? Soren stood silent, but his expression gradually became serious. Since Soren killed the demigod vampire, the Helpheimer's figure disappeared. There was no trace of him in the material plane. There was no news about him in the church of the demigod vampire. Soren was not sure whether he was hiding somewhere in the material plane or had returned to the Bot or Inferno. This dangerous guy had been active in the Bot or Inferno for a long time. It seems that he's back. There was a trace of killing intent in Soren's eyes. The Helpheimer's action this time was very beautiful. There was no trace left. Even if Soren was a true god, there was no way to find him through other means. The souls here were too clean. If only one soul was left, Soren could find the other party's trace. The Helpheimer was very careful. He seemed to have known that Soren had mastered the tracking clergy. After everything was over, he erased any traces of himself. The bard was just a jack of all trades. But if one was strong enough to reach the Helpheimer's level, Many of his basic abilities were comparable to legendary rangers and legendary rogues. Soren suddenly frowned. He raised his hand and something floated out of the ashes of the bonfire in front of him. It was a black feather buried in the bonfire. It seemed that the flames did not burn it. Fallen angel? Soren picked up the black feather and looked at it. His expression suddenly became playful and he murmured, "Did you leave it on purpose? Or did you forget it by accident?" Chapter 727. The Feather of a Fallen Angel. As a true god, Soren could tell at a glance where the feather came from. It seemed that this time it was not only the Helpheimer, but also other senior demons of the Bator Inferno. Soren pondered for a moment and murmured, "Fallen angel? Did he go to the Bator Inferno to find some helpers?" The identity of the Helpheimer was not simple. It was said that he was the chosen of the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. If he really found helpers from the Bator Inferno, Soren was afraid that it would be a bit of a headache. Tracking divinity. With the power of the divinity activated, any clues related to this feather were included in the range of Soren's perception. A trace of a door appeared in the void. The Helpheimer did this a bit flawless. After harvesting the souls, he directly opened the portal and left the material plane. Although the power of the tracking divinity was very strong, it consumed too much power in terms of crossing planes. If Soren was in the form of a god, there would be no problem, but if he was in the form of a saint, it would be difficult to track everything outside the material plane. Moreover, after harvesting this batch of souls, the Helpheimer would have to hide for a while, right? This guy is still a problem if we don't get rid of him. Soren's eyes were very murderous. In the battle at the beginning, the Helpheimer used soul manipulation to take away the soul of the demigod vampire. The soul of a false god had amazing value, and Soren didn't know how much benefit he got. "Clean up here," Soren calmly ordered and said in a deep voice, "I will send a priest to the Windspear Hills at the right time. You need to be careful of the demon's movements." Behind him was a red-haired female pirate dressed as a noble lady. In order to perfectly play the role of a noble and elegant lady, Adele Isabella had put in a lot of hard work. Now, her aristocratic aura had become more and more obvious. Even those who were familiar with her would find it difficult to connect her with the wild red-haired female pirate from before. Although everything in the Windspear Hills was controlled by Soren, on the surface, Adele Isabella was still the lord of this place. There were many things that she had to deal with personally. With the help of Mordor City, she still had a good reputation among the lower-class civilians. "Yes, my lord," Adele Isabella said respectfully, "I'll arrange for people to prepare now." After she finished speaking, she seemed to be avoiding his gaze. Soren was slightly startled when he heard this, and he couldn't help but take another look at her. Nightfall. In a luxurious manner, Soren was sitting in his study room reading books. He had recently been supplementing his knowledge about alchemy. Although gods learned very quickly, it was impossible for them to master everything in one go. If they wanted to improve their alchemy ability, they still needed to spend time accumulating knowledge bit by bit. His reading speed was extremely fast. It only took him about half an hour to finish reading an alchemy book. Then he closed his eyes and pondered for a moment. Then he opened the second book. There were already several books beside it that he had read. Due to the sudden appearance of the Helpheimer, Soren needed to stay here for 2 days to make some follow-up arrangements. There was a soft knock on the door. For the gods, everything around them was within their range of perception. Soren didn't even need to look to know that it was Adele Isabella who came from outside. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. There must be a special meaning for her to come at this time, and she was a little hesitant when she knocked on the door. It seemed that she was a little uneasy. "Come in." Soren put down the book in his hand and shook his head with a smile. He already knew the purpose of the other party coming in the middle of the night. Creak. The door was carefully pushed open. Adele Isabella was wearing a thin dress. Her silky long hair was draped over her shoulders. Her expression was a little uneasy. After entering the room, she immediately closed the door subconsciously. "You're not wearing anything under your clothes." Soren already knew everything. He looked at the nervous Adele Isabella in front of him and said, "What's the matter?" Adele Isabella was nervous. But soon she took a deep breath and calmed down, but her voice was still trembling. She knelt down on one knee in front of Soren and said softly, "My lord, your servant is here to serve." She was nervous, with a trace of panic, with a trace of uneasiness, but there was also a trace of expectation. Perhaps in the whole material plane, Only Soren could make the once powerful pirate leader like this. She was now like a concubine waiting for the emperor in the harem. There was both desire and fear in her heart. Although Soren gave her a lot of important tasks, she had been away from the power center of Mordor for too long. As a special woman, she felt uneasy in her heart, so she longed to have a closer relationship with Soren to ensure her power and status. Maybe it was like this. Or maybe it was because of something else. After all, Sir Soren was a miracle she witnessed with her own eyes. My lord, Soren's short silence made Adele Isabella more and more uneasy. She gently raised her hand and unbuttoned a button on her chest with trembling hands. After revealing her white and deep cleavage, a special emblem also appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Above the right chest, the emblem of the half-elf church, Soren's emblem, she directly imprinted it on her body. Soren sighed slowly. As early as during the day he found out the problem. Although Soren was the god of half-elves and rogues, his identity in the mortal world was the pirate king of the material plane and the ruler of Mordor. Many pirate kings called Soren Your Excellency, which could also be used on gods. He did not force pirates to believe in him and join the half-elf church. So at present, most pirate leaders called him Your Excellency. It was not easy to change one's faith, and Soren's clergy was special. Many pirate leaders had their own gods that they had believed in for a long time. Adele Isabella chose to serve him. The meaning of this was very profound, because it meant that the woman in front of him was not only his follower when she was alive, but her soul would also enter Soren's kingdom and become his petitioner after death. It was hard to refuse. Soren's slightly careless actions could hurt the faith of the woman in front of him. He might even lose a fanatic, an excellent soul with the ability to become a high-grade oracle. Adele Isabella hoped that she could completely stand by Soren's side. She dedicated her loyalty to Soren, not only in life but also in death. This should be the most important thing in the multiverse. Even if she had followed Soren for a long time, this kind of bargaining chip with her soul was enough for Soren to bring her into the core of power. Come here. Soren did not hesitate. As a god, he could not refuse the following and dedication of a fanatic. She was still very pure. This purity would allow her to achieve a pure sublimation after entering the kingdom of God in the future. Gods did not rely on themselves to manage the kingdom of God. In the kingdom of God, they also needed the help of many excellent oracles. Her soul was very pure. Adele Isabella trembled a little as she came in front of Soren. Soren motioned her to stand in front of the desk, then stroked her long hair with his hand, and motioned her to slowly kneel down. Adele Isabella quickly understood what Soren meant. She knelt at Soren's feet with trembling hands and untied his robe. Then she stretched out her white fingers and gently held it, and then slowly opened her mouth. The lights in the room flickered. Soren frowned slightly, and Adele Isabella's panicked apologies immediately came from under his feet. She was not skilled, and it could even be said that she had no experience. Walala. Soren raised his hand and picked up a book to read. After a while, as if to reward Adele Isabella for her efforts, he gently snapped his fingers and cast a spell. Shadow tentacles. Time passed quickly. After staying in the Wind Spear Hills for 3 days and arranging for a high-ranking archbishop to be stationed there, Soren immediately set off for the Eastern Kingdom. At this time it was almost February. The first wave of demons from the bottomless abyss was almost over. The other creatures of the material plane had won a precious and short respite, because by the middle of February, the second wave of demons would be coming, and this time there would be even more demons. The second wave of demons was the real attack because this time there was a regular demon army that had participated in the Abyss Blood War. After the first test, many demon lords in the Abyss could already confirm that the barrier of the material plane was really weakened. They were eager to try. Eager for the rich soul reserves of the material plane, many demon lords were even ready to come to the material plane in person. In the second wave of attacks, demon lords had already come to the mortal world. And this time the scale of the battle would be greatly increased because at the same time when the demon lords came to the mortal world, those good gods who fell to the mortal world because of the Avatar crisis finally could not sit idly by and watch their believers in the mortal world being slaughtered. Some saints began to appear in the eyes of the world, and while fighting against the demon army, they cultivated a group of more fanatical fanatics. The regular demon army had arrived. Even the gods could not avoid it. They had to protect their believers, at least those who were devout. Even the gods of the evil camp had to show up at this time to temporarily fight against the demons, because they could not sit by and watch the demon army attack their church members. If all the believers of the church were dead, Even if they succeeded in surviving the Avatar crisis, so what? Only the foundation of the material plane could support everything in the kingdom of God. Chapter 728. Everything in the Windspear Hills was just a small episode. But Soren now realized that he really needed to think about the future. That was everything about the Divine Kingdom. The original god of half-elves and rogues fell. According to the normal trend of the Avatar crisis, his Divine Kingdom should gradually fall, and even eventually turn into a meteor and fall into the mortal world to form a broken half-Bitwall kingdom. But Soren took over the clergy and temporarily changed this. He succeeded in inheriting the clergy of the god of half-elves and rogues. At the same time, he had a connection with the original Divine Kingdom, temporarily stopping the fall of the Divine Kingdom, and even gradually stabilizing the structure of the Divine Kingdom. But one thing he must pay attention to was that the original Divine Kingdom had been run by the god of half-elves and rogues for hundreds of years. The death of a god would lead to the fall of most of the zealots and petitioners in the Divine Kingdom, and there would be a violent shock inside the Divine Kingdom. Some of the petitioners might still be alive, but the number would definitely not be too many. The process of the Divine Kingdom falling was similar to the catastrophe of the end of the world in 2012. It could be said that the whole Divine Kingdom was collapsing violently. It would be good if 1/10 of the creatures in the Divine Kingdom could survive. This meant that even if the Avatar crisis was over, Soren intended to inherit the original Divine Kingdom, his foundation would be quite unstable. Soren needed a group of zealots. And they must be zealots whose souls were pure enough, and whose strength and talent were good. Because the Divine Kingdom had a unique system, if Soren lived to the end of the Avatar crisis, then he must have his own oracles, servants, high-grade angels, high-grade demons, chanters, soul petitioners, and so on. The management of the Divine Kingdom was a big process. If Soren did not have enough devout zealots, he was afraid that in the future, when other believers died, he would not even have a messenger responsible for receiving the souls. And these often required other gods to spend hundreds or even thousands of years to accumulate. The original god of half-elves and rogues should have left some servants in the Divine Kingdom. But it was obviously not a good thing for Soren to take over the Divine Kingdom to use the servants of the previous god, so he must replace all these people with souls devoutly serving him in the future. Looks like we have to consider putting the construction of schools on the agenda. There was no hesitation in accepting Adele Isabella. She hoped to further strengthen her position through her relationship with Soren. She even hoped that the ownership of her soul after death would be guaranteed. As for Soren, she also had a lot of uses. For a female believer who had the potential to become a legendary, Soren had to pay enough attention to her because she was the foundation of a god. A Divine Kingdom was a competition of soul reserves. Even in the period when there was no Avatar crisis, when some excellent legendary professionals died, their souls could make the incarnation of the gods come in person to guide them to the Divine Kingdom. If there was a legendary class holder who was willing to return to Soren's kingdom before their death, not to mention sending one of his avatars to receive them, he could even send his main body to receive them. This was because he would need many more such believers in the future. At the very least, the number of oracles from the other world would reach double digits. This was not an easy task. This was because only legendary souls could be transformed into otherworldly oracles. The horror of a great divine power was not only reflected in their own divine power, but also in the foundation they had accumulated over a long period of time. Soren's foundation was really thin. Perhaps he still had some foundation in the material plane, but in the Divine Kingdom he had nothing at all. This was because he had never entered the Divine Kingdom. These things could not be left alone. If he waited until the last moment to consider it, he would have lost the opportunity. It took time for people to die, and he could not let his believers die directly. Therefore, the layout in this area may need to be considered many years in advance. The half-elf church still had a group of old enough bishops, but these were not enough to support the framework of the Divine Kingdom. In the blink of an eye, Soren reached the forest area near the Eastern Kingdom. Going through here was the Gobi Desert, and then across the Desert of Death to enter the Eastern Kingdom. The sea route was too time-consuming, and the danger of the Desert of Death was not enough to affect a true god like Soren. However, just as he was about to move on, suddenly there was a feeling from the sky. This was a very special feeling belonging to the level of the gods. A true god had fallen. Because it was still daytime, the stars were almost impossible to see with the naked eye. Therefore, Soren could only sense the true gods who were close to him. The elven god system. In a flash, Soren sensed the identity of the fallen one because there was a mark of the elven god system on him. Someone had killed a true god of the elven god system. Soren had almost no interaction with the elven god system. So far he had not met any true gods of the elves. Therefore, it seemed that there was only one true god who could make him feel and have a close relationship with him. Soren guessed the identity of the fallen one. Arifin Irazil, the elven god of dexterity and thieves. A true god who was in charge of thieves, pranks, and transformations. He had the domains of chaos, elves, luck, and trickery. The reason Soren could sense the fall of the fallen one was very simple. It was because he also had the divine title of rogue. Divine title sensing. Soren had always had a certain connection with the gods who had the same divine title. If there were other gods who had the same divine title falling, Soren would be able to feel it no matter what the situation was. If the gods who had other divine titles fell, Soren would not feel anything. Who killed the elven god of thieves? In a flash, Soren's figure was stunned. He then fell into deep thought and murmured, "The Shadow Lord? The Lady of the Night? Or the Queen of Spiders?" The Shadow Lord and the Queen of Spiders are the most likely. But considering the revenge of the elven god system, I'm afraid that only the Queen of Spiders would dare to do this. Has she already started to act? A true god had fallen. The saints who had fallen into the mortal world did not notice much. Perhaps only the gods who held the same divine title could sense it. The elven god system should know all about it. If a member of the elven god system fell, the enraged elven god system would probably launch a crazy revenge. The elven god of thieves was not very powerful. There were many existences who could kill him, but the one with the strongest motive was probably the Queen of Spiders. Moreover, the elven god of thieves had the realm of chaos, luck, and crafty. These three realms were very useful to the Queen of Spiders. She might not be able to master the luck realm, but the chaos realm and crafty realm were the core strength of the Queen of Spiders. Killing the elven god of thieves could further strengthen her realms. Soren's high priest had not fully recovered his strength because he was hit by the Queen of Spiders' crafty realm. There was dead silence. Although Soren sensed the fall of a true god, he could not determine the location of the fall. However, the thief priesthood of the elves should be empty. Chapter 729. A true god had fallen. A part of a god's domain could be easily absorbed by the enemy, but a god's priesthood could not be easily integrated. This was because the priesthoods were labeled. Soren was the god of rogues for the half-elves, and Arifin Hirasil was the god of thieves for the elves. If Soren killed Arifin Hirasil, then he could integrate the priesthood of thief to strengthen his own priesthood, but it would be difficult to expand his priesthood to the elves. This was because he had to consider the elven god's attitude towards him, which was why many priesthoods were scattered among many races. However, Arifin Hirasil had been killed. The priesthood of thief was currently in a state of limbo, and any god who had the related priesthood could compete for the power of this priesthood. Whether it was the Shadow Lord or Soren, as long as they found the right point, they could try to integrate the power of this priesthood. Should I interfere with the priesthood of thief? This was what Soren was thinking about now. For Soren, who had the priesthood of rogue, integrating the priesthood of thief was almost no difficulty. But the more troublesome thing was that if he did so, he might be involved in the war between a god and the elven gods, and this god was very likely to be the very terrible Queen of Spiders, greater divine power. For a priesthood that could be integrated, he would be involved in the war between the Queen of Spiders and the elven gods. Was it really worth it? Soren could not help but fall into deep thought, and for a moment he was a little uncertain. In terms of strength, Arifin Hirasil, the elven god of thieves and dexterity, should be a little stronger than Soren, because she had a very powerful dexterity attached to her priesthood. She had died in such an inexplicable way. Soren was really hesitant about whether he could participate in this level of event. Moreover, the elven gods would definitely go crazy for revenge. When a main member of a god system was killed, no main god of a god system would be indifferent. Forget it. Let's wait and see. Countless thoughts flashed through Soren's mind, but in the end he chose to give up. I don't think anyone will be able to fuse with the thief divinity in a short period of time. The elven god system should be burning with rage right now. It's best not to get involved in this. The benefits were not proportional to the danger. In this period of time when the Avatar crisis had just begun, it was not a good thing to expose yourself too much, because you may become the target of other gods at any time. The competition for the god of thieves was also fierce. From halflings, dwarves, orcs and other races, there were many gods who had similar priesthoods. Perhaps they had also sensed it? Since Soren had already decided to let it go, it was better for him to focus on his own matters. Moreover, the Queen of Spiders seemed to have started to act. If this was the case, then the battle between the surface elves and the drows would probably break out soon. The scope of the war would probably affect the entire material plane. Although he had decided to wait and see, Soren was still a little worried. He directly sent a message back to the city of Moder through magic, asking Gloria to secretly send people to pay attention to the movements of the Elven Kingdom and pay attention to the next changes in the situation. The god of thieves of the elves was not the god of hunting, Malor. The latter was almost alone, but the former was the main member of the Elven god system. Next, the other Elven gods would probably take action. They were really going to fight. With 2 greater divine power gods and many intermediate divine power gods, the Elven god system was not afraid of anyone. The Elven god system dared to fight with any god of the other gods. Note, the Elven god system has 2 greater divine power gods, 8 intermediate divine power gods, and 1 lesser divine power, and 1 minor divine power god followers. Yellow sand filled the sky. Because of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the chaotic energy had begun to affect the material plane. The Desert of Death was originally just a sandstorm. But now Soren had just entered the range of the Desert of Death, and he felt the abnormality of the climate, followed by a huge tornado gradually coming from afar. No wonder there were almost no caravans going to and from the Eastern Kingdom now. It was almost impossible to trade in such a harsh environment. He was afraid that this trade route had been completely cut off. Violent power. The Desert of Death was the core area of the Arcane Empire, and it was still shrouded in violent magic power. There were Dead Magic Area and Magic Chaos Area here. Even if Soren was a god, he could feel that casting spells here had greatly affected his performance. He must have enough concentration to cast spells. The relatively weak radiation power was still affecting here. The radiation on the surface of the sand was relatively weak, but there was still a huge radiation source deep underground. This radiation source was very similar to the sea near the Treasure Island, because there was also a floating city that fell into the deep sea. At present, no ships dared to pass through because there were too many deep-sea monsters in that sea. Radiation was a kind of energy. The powerful radiation created some terrible mutated creatures, but it also bound them in place. The Nell beetles stayed in place for thousands of years because of the radiation in the underground ruins. The deep-sea monsters would not leave easily because of this. As long as they left the source of the radiation, their power would gradually be affected. There were many extremely dangerous creatures in the Desert of Death, but as long as they were not provoked, they would not be a big problem because they almost never left the range of the Desert of Death. The strong radiation here was their important food, and it was difficult for them to find a place with such strong radiation if they left here. Through the endless Desert of Death. Soren's vision suddenly opened up, no longer covered by the wind and sand. He could even see man-made oases in the distance. If there was an oasis, there would be a town. In the Eastern Kingdom, any oasis was a very precious resource because there were very few lands in the Eastern Kingdom that were relatively rich. In the town, Soren saw some professionals in strange clothes. Oriental dancers, ronin, puppet masters, and necromancers in special robes. These were the names in the Eastern Kingdom. They were actually the advanced professions of warlocks. Earth, water, wind, and fire. Because of the chaotic magic energy, wizards were rarely seen in the Eastern Kingdom, so most of the spellcasters were of the warlock bloodline. Necromancers were an advanced branch of the warlock bloodline. They were more focused on the elemental power of the evocation system. It was a very different world. Whether it was food, clothing, housing, transportation, culture, religion, or various professions, it was very different from the southern part of the continent. Soren finally came to the Eastern Kingdom after so long. Chapter 730. The population in the town wasn't small. The clothes of the people here were a bit similar to the Persian period, and the Oriental dancer's dress was 70 to 80% similar to that of the Huji. The language used was similar to Qixing, and the common language was not very popular here. If a profession with insufficient knowledge came to the Eastern Kingdom, there would often be a situation where communication was not possible, and there were more dialects in the Eastern Kingdom. Monks should be one of the most common professions in the Eastern Kingdom. There were monks guarding the gate of the city. These monks had short hair, wore cloth clothes, leggings, wrist guards, and were dressed in a capable and experienced manner. These were low-level monks. There were no commandments, nor did they have to make a poverty oath. Their lives were similar to ordinary adventurers. There were a lot of brothels in the Eastern Kingdom. Basically, you could see taverns opened by dancers in any town in the Eastern Kingdom. The roundabout dance of the Oriental dancer was a beautiful scene that couldn't be missed when traveling in the Eastern Kingdom. There were almost no wizards here, but occasionally you could see professions dressed as warlocks. The customs of the Eastern Kingdom were not the same in the north and south. Near the desert, women would wear veils, but after leaving the desert, the atmosphere would be much more open. The closer to the sea, the more open the atmosphere. The territory of the Eastern wanderers was full of lewdness and decadence. Most of the monasteries stationed in the desert belonged to the good camp, while most of the monasteries outside the desert and in the rich land belonged to the neutral and evil camp. The Eastern monks who had been cooperating with Soren were the standard evil camp. Because the trade with the East had almost been cut off, there were not many caravans with large camels in the town. However, there were still a lot of professions active in the vicinity. For the adventurers of the Eastern Kingdom, exploring the underground ruins in the desert was just a daily task. You could see professions on the streets selling some handicrafts from the Arcane Empire. Some exquisite statues that had been preserved for thousands of years, some rusty metal parts, some parts of alchemy puppets, stone slabs with recorded words and so on. There were a lot of underground ruins in the Eastern Kingdom. Here, activities like treasure hunting were very popular. Many adventurers who went to explore the underground ruins would bring back something that seemed valuable, and then sell it to others at a high price. As for whether these things were valuable or useful, it was a test of personal vision. Because many things were brought out from the surface of the underground ruins, it was possible that they were purely decorations and waste. Basically, most cities and towns had a small trading area or shop for Taba. Soren walked around the town. He also took a look at Taba's black market, but there was nothing that interested him. There were a few items that glowed faintly, but to a god, ordinary extraordinary equipment could no longer attract his attention. As for the other items, they were worthless. The truly valuable Taba could only be found in a city called the Pearl of the East. There would regularly be a batch of items brought out by legendary adventurers from the Eastern Kingdom who went deep into the underground ruins. The probability of finding legendary equipment was very high, and there was also the possibility of finding lost ancient artifacts. Across the street was the Dancer Tavern. There was a crowd of onlookers on the side of the street. Soren stopped and glanced around. He saw a young man performing a puppet show. There were a few palm-sized puppets. There were a few extremely thin threads connected to it. Under the young man's control, the threads moved nimbly, holding the wooden weapon and fighting in a ball. "All right. Let's do it again." The onlookers cheered from time to time. If someone thought it was not bad, they would throw a few copper coins. Puppeteer. A group of people who specialized in alchemy in the Eastern Kingdom. Most of them were bards, warlocks, and oriental dancers. They inherited some of the knowledge from the Arcane Empire and improved the process of making golem puppets. They simplified the process of making golem puppets and turned it into a wooden puppet that was easier to get started. These puppets were actually all living things. They were blessed with the lowest level of activated construct life. If they needed to fight, they could be directly replaced with real swords. Because of the influence of the monks, the puppets of the Eastern Kingdom were more delicate and more flexible in battle. Some puppeteers could even make puppets with special abilities. Wasn't this very similar to the golem puppets with special abilities? A very low-level puppeteer. Soren lost interest after a few glances. This kind of puppeteer who performed on the street was similar to the bards. They were a very common kind of people in the Eastern Kingdom. In front of him was the tavern. The tavern of the Eastern Kingdom had an additional sound of music. As soon as he entered the door, he saw a dancer wearing a gorgeous corset dress. It was best not to make trouble in the tavern of the Eastern Kingdom. Because of the Eastern Princess, the dancers controlled a large number of gray areas in this land. They were a big force second only to many monasteries. Soren just entered the door and took a look, and he found at least 3 oriental dancers with good strength. Wuxia Tavern. Soren seemed to think of something. He chuckled and shook his head. Then he waved his hand and called a maid. After a moment, a middle-aged dancer came down from the attic. She looked at Soren with surprise and chuckled, "Sir, are you from the south?" Soren nodded silently. His dress was noticed by people along the way because the dress of the south coast was very different from that of the Eastern Kingdom. It's not easy to cross the desert recently. The beautiful dancer in front of him smiled and gently approached Soren's side. A faint fragrance came. She seemed to be a little teasing. "What service do you want?" Since it was a place of romance, there was naturally a sex business. The Oriental dancers provided assassination, intelligence, espionage, sex, and other transactions. They were somewhat similar to bards, but they were powerful generalists. The formally trained Oriental dancers needed to master at least 3 of the various skills such as disguise, poison, medicine, charm, hypnosis, illusion, investigation, stealth, and so on. In the Eastern Kingdom, the dancers took over a lot of businesses that belonged to the Thieves' Association. Moreover, the Eastern Princess controlled a very powerful Thieves' Association. She was the largest intelligence dealer in the Eastern Kingdom. Map. Soren didn't care about the provocation of the dancer in front of him. As the ruler of Motor City, the true god served by the half-elves, if he really pursued beauty, there were countless beautiful half-elven girls waiting for him to choose. He simply ignored the little charm that the other party secretly used and slowly said, "I need a map. The bigger and more detailed, the better. Money is not a problem." Chapter 731. Soren was not very familiar with the Eastern Kingdom. He used to spend most of his time in the Underdark. Although he also traveled to the Eastern Kingdom, it was just a quick glance, and one of the missions he received was to assassinate the Eastern Princess. Soren should be one of the few professions who had fought with the Eastern Princess, so he knew a little about the strength of the Eastern Princess. Now his identity was very different. Naturally, there was no need to be hostile to the Eastern Princess for a little reward. If possible, it was best to win her over. Map. Hearing Soren's words, the dancer in front of him immediately looked a little uninterested. She smiled and said, "Then please wait for me." After that, she swayed her slender waist and went upstairs. About a few minutes later, the Oriental dancer came out again. She raised her hand and put a parchment map in front of Soren. She said lazily, "I don't know if this guest is satisfied?" A map. The entire terrain of the Eastern Kingdom was marked, including almost all the oases and cities. Even the routes were clearly marked. However, Soren frowned after reading it and said slowly, "I don't want this kind of garbage." This was just a topographic map. Ordinary Eastern adventurers could get it. The marks on it were just very common things. What Soren wanted to know was not at all. He looked up at the Oriental dancer in front of him, released a little bit of the aura of a legendary profession and said slowly, "I want a map that records all the underground relics and secret realms that have been discovered in the Eastern Kingdom. This kind of garbage is of no use to me." She didn't know if it was an illusion. The Oriental dancer in front of him suddenly felt that Soren was different. At first, she just felt that he was a good adventurer, but now she felt that Soren was like a wild beast. His gaze swept gently on her neck, and the Oriental dancer felt that her neck might be broken by him at any time. It was like wiping away a little inconspicuous dust. All of a sudden she broke out in a cold sweat. It seemed that she had met a master. This might be a legendary, sir. Your Excellency. The Oriental dancer suddenly changed the way she addressed him, and her tone was a little trembling. She said carefully, "I am not qualified to complete a transaction of this level. If you need, you can come back tomorrow." Ruins map. This was beyond the scope of a normal adventurer's trade, and it was not within her authority. At the very least, she needed to be at Butterfly's level to be able to make the trade that Soren needed. Tomorrow? Soren frowned again and said, "Okay. Arrange a room for me. I've been waiting for you all day." Having a map and not having one were two different things. As a god, Soren was not omniscient, so waiting for one more day was not a big deal. "Sir, please follow me." Perhaps she had guessed that Soren was a legendary professional, so the Oriental dancer's expression was much more respectful. She whispered, "Your room is here. Lady Alice should be back tomorrow." Alice? He should be the person in charge here. Soren didn't care very much. After the Oriental dancer arranged a room for him, he quietly read a book. A day passed quickly. The next day, a maid invited him to go to the 3rd floor. It seemed that the person in charge here had returned. "Please come in." A soft female voice came from the room, and it seemed that she was not very old. Soren pushed the door and entered the room. He immediately saw a girl wearing a delicate blue and white floral dress, with beautiful short blonde hair and a red headband on her head. The girl's face was delicate and pleasant. She did not look very old, about 16 or 17 years old. Her face was more inclined to the southern people of the continent, not like the indigenous people of the eastern countries. She was sitting at the desk reading a very thick book. Next to her were several delicate girl dolls the size of a palm working. They were sorting out information and one of them was lying on another thick book and sleeping. Puppet master? Soren looked at the other party with surprise. Most of the puppet masters in the eastern countries specialized in alchemy. They were experts in making golem puppets. However, the girl in front of him was very different from the puppets he saw yesterday. They were not at the same level at all. These girl puppets were not only flexible, but also had rich facial expressions. They were uniformly wearing a gray-white maid dress, and their skin looked very white. He didn't know what material they were made of. What a delicate puppet doll. Soren had never seen such a high-level puppet doll. In the application of some alchemy techniques, he was afraid that it was comparable to the one that Soren's demon incarnation encountered in the bottomless abyss. Is it a high-level alchemy life? If it was really a high-level alchemy life, then the girl in front of him should be a legendary puppet master. Lilith. The girl who was reading a book looked up at Soren and whispered, "Please have some tea." As soon as she finished her words, one of the girl puppets who was sorting out the book stood up. She used her slender little hand to tidy up her maid dress, and then her slender figure rose into the air. Her white hand, which was only the size of an adult's finger, picked up the teacup beside her and poured a pot of tea. She brought it to Soren. She flew over. This was simply unbelievable. Soren had never seen such a strange alchemy life. These girls were enchanted with at least 10 different spells. Whether it was strength, speed, or intelligence, they were far superior to other golem puppets. It was as if they were living creatures with intelligence. Is it really a high-level alchemy life? Soren's pupils shrank. He could roughly guess what was going on. These girls were all living creatures, and they had their souls injected with special spells. Please enjoy. The girl puppet named Lilith floated in front of Soren. She gently twirled the corner of her dress with her fingers and performed a ladle-like salute. She spoke with a cold mechanical voice, "My name is Lilith, Master's head maid." Unbelievable. Soren felt that the girl puppet in front of him had completely surpassed the level of ordinary golem puppets. Ordinary golem puppets only had a certain level of intelligence and could act according to their master's orders. But the girl puppet in front of him had a very high level of intelligence. Even the expression on her face was so vivid. Her level of intelligence had probably reached the level of Thaling. At this time, the girl who was reading closed her book and looked up at Soren. She slowly said, "Do you want a high-level map? It's not that cheap." Chapter 732. This girl must have some kind of advanced technology from the Arcane Empire. Soren had never seen a golem puppet like this in his adventuring career. Because of the complicated runes needed to be engraved on it, the bigger the golem, the easier it was to make it. Even an ordinary clay golem weighed more than 1,000 pounds and was more than 2 meters tall. It looked like a mini giant. As for the other golem puppets, they must be even bigger. To shrink a golem to the size of a palm, the alchemy skills needed were quite amazing. At the very least, the engraving skills needed to reach a terrifying level when engraving runes. The ratio of the runes inside the golem was the same, and this kind of shrinkage was hundreds of times more demanding on the materials used to make the golem puppet. Soren's eyes lit up. As the core area of the Arcane Empire, the Eastern Kingdom had never given up on the exploration of the underground ruins for thousands of years. It was impossible for the Arcane Empire to not leave anything behind after its destruction. More or less, there would be some discoveries. The girl in front of Soren must have mastered the golem craftsmanship from the Arcane Empire, and this kind of golem craftsmanship was very valuable to him. Customer? Seeing that Soren did not immediately reply, the girl frowned. She did not seem to be very patient. Maybe it was because Soren came at the right time to disturb her reading, so her attitude gradually became colder. "If you don't need it, you can leave now." She was a difficult girl to deal with. Soren made this judgment in a very short time. He glanced at the golem puppet next to him. The strange silver-white metal was a bit similar to the golem puppet he met in the abyss. At least the materials were very similar. He was even more certain of his judgment. He slowly asked, "How much?" The girl glanced at Soren and said, 12,000 Kindler. What? This time even Soren was shocked. He said in surprise, "So expensive? It's just a map." 12,000 Kindlers. This price was enough to buy 1 or 2 battleships, and a large number of extraordinary grade equipment. Normal maps only cost 10 Kindler coins. The girl didn't seem to mind. She curled her lips and said, "But the map you want is a high-level map of all the underground ruins. In order to discover and explore these ruins we paid a great price." "This price is not expensive." Soren fell into deep thought, then slowly said, "Deal. Can I trade with gems?" The price was indeed a little too high, but there weren't many forces in the Eastern Kingdom that could take out such a map. Although it was just a small town, it was the first stop on the Eastern trade route and also the city closest to the Desert of Death. Usually, only the core members under the Eastern Empress would be sent to guard this place. If it wasn't for the uniqueness of this place, it would be impossible for a legendary puppet master to stay here. Sure. The girl casually picked up a thick book and lightly said, "Take out the gem and let me have a look. I'll appraise it for you." Soren definitely didn't have that many gold coins on him. He casually took out a handful of gems, half of which were diamonds, and directly placed them on the table. "Okay. The price is 12,000 Kindler coins." The girl's eyes slightly lit up when she glanced at the pile of gems, then calmly said, "Chris, go to the back and take out the map on the 3rd floor." The gems were worth far more than 12,000 Kindler coins. According to Soren's estimation, it should be around 15,000 Kindler coins. This was just a small test. Soren wanted to use this method to determine the girl's character. First of all, she definitely wasn't someone from the good faction. Someone who could do something like this was at most from the neutral faction. He could deal with her. The girl in front of him waved her hand, and the gems disappeared. Then, the head maid, Lilith, flew to the table and lifted one of the puppets that was sleeping on top of a book. "Chris, don't sleep in any more. Hurry up and get the things." The head maid seemed a little angry. She looked at the puppet girl who was sleeping on top of the book and said, "You've been sleeping for a whole day. Unbelievable." If they didn't have special settings when they were created, then they really did know how to think like intelligent creatures. To make an alchemical life form like this, only a legendary level living construct spell could do that. The doll girl who had been sleeping on top of the spellbook finally opened her eyes. She had a sleepy expression as she rubbed her eyes with her slender arms, revealing a very human-like sleepy look. "Why am I the one who has to get it again?" she whispered. "I'm so sleepy. Why don't you let me sleep a little longer?" The light of a spell appeared. The puppet girl named Chris floated in the air. She tilted her head and glanced at Soren. Then her eyes lit up and said, "You smell so good. I like you." Hearing the puppet girl's words, Alice, who had been indifferent all this time, suddenly raised her head and looked at Soren in surprise. She knew how special her puppet girl was. She rarely paid attention to outsiders, so when she suddenly said that she liked Soren, it meant something very special. Soren's expression was also very shocked. This was because he actually saw the brilliance of divinity in this little doll girl. How was this possible? As her master, Soren didn't feel a trace of divinity on Alice, but on the puppet girl she made, Soren felt a weak divinity. There wasn't much divinity. When converted into a specific value, it was about 2 to 3 points. But even if it was only a little bit of divinity, it was enough to completely change the doll girl in front of him, making her completely different from the other doll girls. How is this possible? How can an alchemical life form have divinity? Soren was also very surprised. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. He thought to himself, it can't be given by someone. It can't be absorbed by an enemy. Could it be? The puppet master in front of me used divinity when making this puppet girl? This was very likely. Although there weren't many things in the material plane that contained divinity, there were more or less some, such as parts of divine artifacts, special ritual tools in temples, and special metals that were divinity-stained, and so on. If the puppet girl was made with divinity, then it was possible that she had divinity on her. Chapter 733. The girl stared at Soren for a while. Only then did she remember that she had yet to complete the task that her master had given her. She immediately flew towards the back of the room. She didn't know if it was because she hadn't woken up or because she was too distracted, but she actually bumped into the door frame, leaving a small human-shaped dent in it. She then stumbled into the bookshelf. About a minute or two later, she wobbled out with a parchment map in her arms and carefully placed it in front of Soren. There were still magic imprints on the parchment map, but Soren wiped them away with a wave of his hand. "Thank you." Soren nodded slightly and opened the parchment map in front of him. He still needed to verify if it was real or fake. "You're welcome." The girl flew around Soren twice before landing on his shoulder. Soren was a little surprised when he turned around to look at her, but he saw her take a deep breath in satisfaction. She then laid on Soren's shoulder with a sleepy look and murmured, "So comfortable. I want to sleep on you." Divine sense. The girl's divinity seemed to be related to Soren's divinity. She was weak and couldn't completely fuse with the divinity, so Soren's divinity had an effect on her. Death? Or slaughter? Soren slightly activated his divinity and immediately felt a trace of divinity. It shouldn't be the domain of slaughter, but it definitely had something to do with the divinity of death. It was located on the girl's chest, and the divinity was fused with the materials that made her. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk Soren spread out the parchment map and looked at it. This high-level map was directly engraved with magic. Not only did it mark all the cities in the Eastern Kingdoms, but it also marked out the locations of various underground ruins and large blank areas, as well as dangerous creatures and ancient monsters that might be sealed in them. This was the map that Soren really needed, and it was even more detailed than the one he got from the Holy Avenger. There were over 100 locations of underground ruins marked on the map. Some places even indicated the degree of danger. These were all information gathered by risking human lives. Ordinary adventurers would not mark anything on a map like this. No problem. Soren put away the map in his hand. He took a look at it and immediately found a few places that he was interested in. One was the temple discovered by the demon incarnation. It was labeled as Death God's Ruins, and a row of small words recorded that it was the temple of a fallen death god. It seemed to be occupied by a lich. The second one was the Magic Ruins. During the destruction of the Arcane Empire, the floating city that fell to the ground but did not explode was still intact. Unfortunately, it had been occupied by many magic sunflowers, and so far, no one had been able to go deep into the core area. The last one was the ruins of the Amaska Empire. The Amaskas were even more ancient than the Arcane Empire. The Amaskas opened the door to another world, passing through the barriers of the multiverse and attracting the gods of other worlds, which eventually led to the destruction of the entire empire. During this period there was also an invasion of the orcs, which eventually led to the outbreak of the War of the Orcs. The gods fought in a way that was not inferior to the Avatar crisis. The impact of this war had not been eliminated yet. Some of the gods that were served in the desert were the beliefs that were spread when they stayed in the material plane at that time. In addition, there were relatively few ruins that were worth exploring and useful to Soren. The ruins left by the Mind Stealer Empire were also marked on it. Although Soren knew that there were a lot of good things in it, he had no plans to explore it for the time being. Because the ruins went directly deep into the Underdark, and there were 11 elders of the Mind Stealer. There was a divine-level mind control crystal and a special blood pool under this ruin. It was not until the end of the Avatar crisis that a team of high-grade legendary adventurers brought it out. With this map, basically all the ruins that had been discovered in the Eastern Kingdom could be found. Soren put away the parchment map. When he turned his head, the puppet girl named Chris had fallen asleep on his shoulder. This was the aftereffect of divinity fusion. Vivian fell into a deep sleep for a long time because she could not completely integrate the power of divinity. Now this puppet girl was the same as Vivian, and her spirit was weaker than Vivian's. The soul of the artificial construct life was not strong enough, and it would take a long time to digest this divinity. Alice had been looking at Soren all the time. Especially when she saw her most special puppet girl, Chris, sleeping on Soren's shoulder, her expression showed a trace of surprise. Chris was the most willful and intelligent puppet girl she had ever made. She would hardly get close to any outsiders, and her attitude towards ordinary people could even be said to be a little arrogant. Sometimes she would even say something like, "Stupid mortals," but now she was lying on Soren's shoulder with a look of longing. This was a bit unbelievable. Soren looked at the sleeping puppet girl lying on his shoulder, and his expression suddenly became a little awkward. Now that the deal had been completed, he could neither stay nor leave. Chris. As the master of the puppet girl, Alice had absolute control. She slightly raised her eyebrows and said lightly, "The guest is leaving. Now get down and go back to sleep." She could naturally see that Soren was not an ordinary person, or she would not be so polite. Oh. The puppet girl lazily got up and seemed a little reluctant. She stood up shakily and then said in Soren's ear, "Chris likes you very much. It's very comfortable to stay on your body. When will you come next time?" Divinity was a domain unknown to ordinary people. Perhaps even the legendary puppeteer girl in front of him did not realize the changes that were happening to the puppets that she had created. The transformation was in progress. When the transformation was complete, the puppet girl would become a real life with a complete soul, and evolve into a divine creature. Unfortunately, even her master did not seem to know about this. Next time? It shouldn't be too long. Soren pondered for a moment, and some divine constructs that he saw in the Nirvana Clockwork's mechanical mirror flashed in his mind. This kind of life form was very special. He stared at the palm-sized puppet girl in a blue and white maid outfit and smiled. "You look a little uncomfortable. Come, let me give you a hand." After saying that, a golden light appeared on Soren's fingertip, and then he stretched out his finger and lightly touched the puppet girl's forehead. Chapter 734. There was a golden glow. As Soren reached out his finger and gently touched the girl's forehead, an invisible energy wave began to ripple in the room. The place where Soren stretched out his hand and pointed was like a finger falling into a lake. The irresistible energy even affected this narrow space. All of a sudden, everything in the room seemed to be isolated from the material plane. The figure of the girl flying in front of Soren shook, and so did Alice, who was standing behind the desk with a surprised look on her face. A mental connection? No wonder he can control it so well. Low-grade puppeteers would have a string connected to their puppets, but once they reached a higher grade they would no longer need this string. Puppeteers would then use their minds to control their puppets. However, a higher level of control was not just using one's mind, but directly creating a mental connection with the puppets. The puppets were like another body, and as the owner she could feel what the construct life form could feel. Fast. This was what Alice felt. When Soren gently touched the girl's forehead, she also felt as if a finger was gently touching her forehead, and then she felt a vast power that was like the starry sky. A power that was above all things. Soren only touched the girl's forehead lightly and then withdrew his finger. Compared to his 76 divinity, the girl in front of him was still too weak. He was afraid that if he accidentally released too much divinity, it would destroy her consciousness. All right. Soren slowly got up and looked at the construct girl in front of him. He also glanced at her master Alice and said slowly, "I should leave now. You'll be more energetic for a while, so you should train your will when you have time. I'll come back to see you in a few days." Soren's finger lightly touched the girl's forehead, and the sleepy Chris, who looked as if she could not get enough sleep, suddenly became much more energetic. As a construct life form, she did not really need to rest. The reason she was so sleepy was that her soul, will and spirit could not bear the power of divinity. It was like a robot needing to sleep to recover its spirit. It was completely suppressed by divinity. Chris is feeling much better. I don't feel so tired anymore. You wouldn't feel dizzy either. Ah, thank you so much. The doll girl jumped in front of Soren and kissed him on the cheek. She then said happily, "This feels so good." It seemed like Chris had come back to life. The palm-sized doll girl danced around Soren like a bee, and from time to time she would let out a cheerful laughter. On the other hand, Alice's expression turned solemn. As a legendary level puppeteer, she was also a powerful warlock. A puppeteer itself required a certain amount of spellcasting ability. Basically, a profession that couldn't use spells couldn't become a puppeteer even if they had mastered a high level of alchemy. If Soren remembered correctly, the requirement to become a puppeteer was 180 points in alchemy and at least 1 circle in spellcasting. This class with the ability to cast spells included wizards, warlocks, necromancers, bards, oriental dancers and so on. Alice's second-class advancement was Witch, one of the variants of warlocks in the Eastern Kingdom. For example, necromancers were warlocks who were proficient in evocation spells, while witches were a group of warlocks who were proficient in incantation spells. In the southern part of the continent, many wizards would choose a school of expertise to improve their spellcasting ability. This process may require the ability to oppose another school of expertise, but it could greatly improve their mastery of the chosen school of expertise and obtain some additional spells, increase spell slots of the school of expertise. The Eastern Kingdom was shrouded in a chaotic magical energy. Therefore there were very few wizards here. Warlocks had always been the mainstream spellcasters in the Eastern Kingdom. They relied on the power of the bloodline to strengthen their spellcasting ability through learning. With the evolution of time, the warlocks in the Eastern Kingdom began to change factions. Gradually, there were necromancers who were proficient in evocation spells and witches who were proficient in incantation spells. For some unknown reason, the warlocks who were proficient in incantation spells were basically female. This was an incomprehensible reason. For example, in the thousands of years of Arendel's life, only female members of the royal family could awaken the ice ability, while none of the other male members of the royal family could. Perhaps it was because of genetic reasons, or the genetic sequence was more suitable for females. Name, Alice Evanus. Race, human, Norman. Attributes, Strength 14, Agility 19, Vitality 12, Intelligence 21, Wisdom 16, Charm 30. Alignment, Lawful Neutral Class, Level 5 Warlock, Level 10 Witch Incantation User. Max, Level 7 Golem Master, Grade 5. Others? Abilities? Skills? As a legendary Golem Master, Alice's spellcasting ability was far inferior to that of a wizard of the same level. However, the perception of a legendary spellcaster was still the same. In the power that Soren displayed at that moment, she vaguely saw the light of divinity. She knew that the man in front of her was not as simple as a legendary profession. Therefore, the moment Soren was about to leave, she immediately took out the gemstone that she had put away at the beginning and said, "Your Excellency." "Please wait." "Your Excellency." The way she addressed Soren changed immediately, and Alice began to address him respectfully. "There's no need." Soren turned around and glanced at the gemstones on the table. He seemed to understand what she meant. However, he used the common language at the beginning to speak, but then he spoke in another language. "I may have something to trouble you with in 2 days. Consider these gemstones as an advance payment." Soren's light touch earlier had already far exceeded the value of a high-level map to Alice. Obviously. Soren's second sentence was spoken in another language. Alice understood it, so she subconsciously stopped. At this moment, Soren suddenly spoke again, slowly saying, "You really are a Norman. I was wondering why there was a pure-blooded human like you in the Eastern countries. If you are a Norman, then it makes sense. I heard that there aren't many humans left in your group." "All right. I should leave. If there's a chance, I'll visit you again." At first, Sauron wanted to say something more, but he seemed to have remembered something and immediately stopped. He just chose to leave directly. Chapter 735. The Normans. As mentioned before, they were a group of people with a lifespan even greater than the half-elves. They belonged to a branch of the human race that possessed a special affinity for magic. The origin of the Normans could no longer be verified. Some said that they were already born during the age of thorium, while others said that they were a race that only appeared during the Arcane Empire. The Normans were pure-blooded humans and were considered to be a higher class of humans by some ancient scholars. Their birth was inseparable from the pursuit of immortality by the Arcanists. A large part of the legends believed that the pursuit of immortality by the Arcanists led to the birth of the Normans. The lifespan of the Normans was up to 300 years. That was their natural lifespan and did not require any additional power. If they were able to become professionals, the lifespan of the Normans could be greatly extended. Sometimes they could even live longer than the High Elves. There were no longer any Normans in the southern part of the continent. Most of the ancient people had already disappeared. Only the Eastern Kingdom still had a few of them. However, they did not have a good time in the Eastern Kingdom, mainly because the long lifespan of the Normans brought them disaster. There was once a tyrant in the Eastern Kingdom. When the tyrant was about to reach the end of his lifespan, he did everything he could to extend his lifespan. There were many ways to extend one's lifespan in the material plane. However, most of them were in the hands of the spellcasters. Unfortunately, the tyrant was only a warrior. The ways to extend one's lifespan that he had access to were extremely limited. In the end, after trying several methods to no avail, the tyrant turned his attention to the Normans of the Eastern Kingdom. The blood of the Normans. He used an evil method to extract a potion from the blood of the Normans to extend his lifespan. The entire story could be guessed. At that time, the Normans, who were already very few in number, suffered heavy casualties. Although the tyrant succeeded in extending his lifespan, he also angered the Normans. Thus, the last kingdom of the Eastern Kingdom was destroyed in the chaos of war. From that time until now, no other kingdom had appeared in the Eastern Kingdom. Even now, the Eastern Kingdom maintained a relatively loose city-state system. The monastery also took the opportunity to become the most powerful force in the Eastern Kingdom. Soren obviously should not have mentioned the disaster that befell the Normans. Therefore, he took back the words he was about to say and simply turned around to leave. He had already planted a tracking mark on the girl named Alice. If necessary, Soren could use tracking to locate her at any time. Although he was very interested in the black technology of the arcane empire that she had mastered, Soren still decided to wait. After all, it was the first time they had met and he still had a strong sense of vigilance in his heart. It was better to wait until they met a few times before considering cooperation. Furthermore, running away after acting tough, how exciting. Yellow sand filled the sky. After leaving the town, Soren headed towards the west of the Eastern Kingdom. The location of the Reaper's ruins was about 300 kilometers away from here. It was located in the quicksand area near the northwest of the Death Desert. Before leaving, Soren sent a magic message to Gloria. He briefly described the encounter with the girl named Alice and described in detail the girl doll that she made. Soren was not very familiar with the black technology of alchemy, so Gloria should know more about it. She should know more about the level of this black technology and whether it was worth Soren's precious time and energy. About an hour later, Gloria's magic message came back. Her words were very simple and the general idea was, "You'd better bring that girl back to me at all costs. It would be best if you can kidnap her back, but if you can't, then force her back. In the worst-case scenario, you have to kill her and bring back her doll and related things." Finally, Gloria told Soren that the girl named Alice might have the best alchemy knowledge from the arcane empire. It could be used to inject expertise into golems. The alchemy technology that she had might be more valuable than what Soren brought back from the Battle of the Golems. Even after a while, Gloria also mentioned this matter to the Fallen Witch. The Fallen Witch also sent a magic message, which meant that if there was no other way, she would temporarily put aside what she was doing and help Soren kill the girl named Alice. Finally, she confirmed that Alice still had the best rune engraving knowledge in her hands. Without this kind of top-level knowledge, the golems couldn't have shrunk to the size of a palm and retained so many powerful abilities. Even the Fallen Witch also suspected that Alice had another application of the levitation ring, because according to Soren's description, these dolls could directly fly off the ground and didn't need to cast any spells. Fly freely. This wasn't something that could be done with alchemy's levitation device alone. In short, the two legendary witches both believed that the girl named Alice had a lot of black technology from the arcane empire. Alright. Maybe it was because they had been with Soren for a long time, the two legendary witches had also become decisive. Now that he had determined the value of this legendary golem master through Gloria, Soren naturally knew what to do next. Killing was definitely not a good way, not to mention that Alice had the more powerful Eastern princess behind her, so it was not suitable to be hostile to her at this time. So Soren could only find a way to get close to her first. It would be best if he could take her back to Mordor City. Mordor City also had black technology. Whether it was the war chest half-bit wall or the wizard tower in the Shadow Plain, or the recently acquired elemental furnace, or even Soren's identity as a true god. For this kind of special advanced golem master, there were always one or two things in Mordor City that could attract her attention. Many legendary spellcasters were academic maniacs. As long as he took her back to Mordor City, Gloria should have a way to get something useful from her mouth. Soren had already foreseen that the golem technology in Mordor City would advance by leaps and bounds. He flew for more than 300 kilometers. There were too many areas of magic chaos in the Eastern Kingdom. During this time, Soren had to walk for a while, but fortunately he successfully found the place. He even found the location where the demon avatar first fought. The location of the Reaper's ruins was in this area. Because of the wind and sand here, he still needed to look for a little bit. However, relying on his god-level perception, Soren still determined the location through the fluctuation of magic energy. The Reaper's ruins. Soren was very curious about the ruins left by the Reaper. Chapter 736. Yes. I've started writing the epilogue of this book. The storyline of the Succubus Queen, which was cut off for some reason, will be updated regularly on the public WeChat account. The epilogue will overlap with the main storyline, and a small part of the future plot will jump a lot, but the content will appear in the epilogue. The first epilogue will be updated this Wednesday, and the storyline of the Succubus Queen and the Fallen Witch will have a separate volume. You can see it if you follow the public WeChat account. The wind howled. The closer he got to the Death God's ruins, the more Soren felt the chaotic energy in the air. In the Eastern Kingdom, casting spells required a high concentration, and if one's concentration wasn't enough, there was a possibility of the spell backfiring. The part of the Reaper's ruins exposed to the surface appeared in Soren's sight. Before he got close to the entrance of the Reaper's ruins, he had already felt a chaotic magic energy emerging from the depths of the ground. According to the markings on the map, this place was already occupied by a powerful lich. It studied chaotic magic here, and the inside of the Death God's ruins was always shrouded in magical energy. The lich. This kind of monster that stood at the top of the undead was very difficult to deal with. Under normal circumstances, almost no adventurers would be willing to face them, because even if they killed the lich, if they didn't destroy their phylactery, these terrible undead would resurrect within 10 days. Even a powerful god wouldn't have an easy time facing a lich, and many prophecies couldn't find the location of the phylactery. Unless it was a god with a special power, it was very difficult to directly kill a lich. Soren was a god with a special power. This was because he had a very powerful domain, slaughter domain. Any god with a domain related to death could directly destroy the lich's soul when killing them, and then turn their life-saving phylactery into a useless piece of trash. Because of this, a part of the lich would serve a god with a domain related to death, and almost no lich would take the initiative to provoke a god with a domain related to death. The lich sought the mystery of death. Although they had a huge power that mortals couldn't imagine, in fact there was still a big gap between a lich and a god. There were many demigod lich in history, but there was only one who could successfully become a god. That was the god of liches, Visharan, weak divine power. This lucky lich god was originally a member of the ancient Red Robe sorcerers. Later, he received guidance from the Lord of Storms during his research and relied on his powerful divine power to become a god. However, at that time, the Lord of Storms only intended to establish a divine system, and he needed a divine servant that he could manipulate. For this reason, the god of liches was forced to seek cooperation from the god of mages, and form an alliance. Thus, the god of lich successfully established a relationship with the goddess of magic and used this to escape the Lord of Storms as revenge. This guy was a fence-sitter among the gods. On one hand, he was using the relationship with the god of mages to get close to the goddess of magic. On the other hand, he was trying to please the Lord of Storms to get his forgiveness. Then he was secretly trying to please the Lady of the Night in exchange for more life-saving chips. Until now, he was still worried that the Lord of Storms would take back the power he had bestowed upon him. Note, the god of mages had been assisting the goddess of magic for a long time. He was originally the most powerful mortal mage, and in a battle that lasted for several years, he defeated the god of prophecy and imprisoned this god in his staff. Later, he served the goddess of magic and was promoted to a god by the second generation of the goddess of magic. As one of the important gods of the goddess of magic, the relationship between the god of lich and most of the gods of death was very tense. Many of the gods of death saw him as a potential enemy that could touch the god of death. Buzz. A strange vibration came from the depths of the ground, and then it gradually calmed down. A powerful lich stayed in the god of death's ruins. Soren didn't need to guess to know that it was definitely related to the death domain. It had stayed here for decades. If it didn't find something, it wouldn't have stayed here for so long in the death desert shrouded in chaotic energy. The environment here wasn't suitable for magic experiments. If the failure rate of magic experiments in other places was 50%, then it was at least 90% here. The chaotic energy outside had affected everything. The violent radiation in the death desert had formed a local tidal wave. The death domain. As one of the gods who controlled the death domain, Soren was almost determined to get this power. Shadow hide. Soren's figure disappeared into the darkness. He was now facing the top undead creature, the lich. So even though Soren was a god, he didn't dare to be careless. Besides, this lich had been here for decades. If there was really the power left by the god of death here, the enemy would not be a simple lich. Soren suspected that the other party might have evolved into a demigod lich. Disarm the trap. The entrance to the god of death's ruins was under the sand dune. Before Soren got close, he found a security trap on the periphery. As the god of rogues and half-elves, such a trap was not difficult for Soren. He easily disarmed the 3 trigger traps on the periphery. Shadow leap. The cross-plane phase shift helped Soren avoid the first trap inside. This kind of trap was too troublesome to touch. It was necessary to destroy the surface structure of the wall, which could easily alarm the lich deep underground. So it was easier to travel through the shadow plane. Dimension shift. After entering the god of death's ruins, it was dark. The undead didn't need light, and the lich didn't set up any lighting tools here. On the contrary, over the past few decades, it had set up hundreds of traps outside for no reason. Almost every 3 steps, there would be a trap that would be triggered. Soren glanced around and found at least 5 traps that were set with Finger of Death and Disintegrate. Damn it. This lich is really ruthless. Soren stopped a little at the corner and murmured, if it was a team of legendary adventurers, maybe a few of them would have died. All of them are instant death spells. If you don't resist a little, even a legendary profession will die in an instant. Instant death traps. Even legendary rogues would be afraid of this kind of trap because rogues didn't have enough immunity. If they failed to remove the trap, they could be killed in an instant. After passing through the death passage set up by the lich, the number of traps began to decrease significantly. However, there were more high-level warning devices. If it weren't for Soren being a god, he wouldn't have known when he triggered the device and alarmed the lich below. No wonder no one wanted to crusade against it for so long. There were probably not many professions in the Eastern Kingdom who could pass the first half of the journey. This is? After Soren passed through the passage, his eyes suddenly opened up. This was a very wide hall, surrounded by broken marble pillars. Part of the hall had collapsed, and there was a lot of quicksand piled up there. There were many reliefs on the wall near the right side, carved with some hideous undead creatures. It looked like a war in the underworld and a servant of death with a huge scythe. It really is the Temple of Death. It looks like the death of the evil alignment. There were very few death gods in the good alignment. The current, King of the Dead, was only in the neutral alignment. When he was still immortal, he was a good warrior. After taking over as a god, he was forced to change to the neutral alignment. Although the doctrine of the King of the Dead was a little biased towards good, he still maintained the neutral nature of the death realm. The death of the evil alignment? It seems that there are only a few of them, right? The reliefs on the wall provided clues for Soren. As for which death god this temple belonged to, the scope suddenly narrowed a lot. Is it the temple of the King of Bones? Soren carefully looked around and murmured, the scale of this temple should belong to the giant god temple. The gods who have the ability to build such a large temple are at least mid-level gods. If that's the case, there are very few qualified candidates. King of Bones, God of Murder, God of Death, Naruto, God of Slaughter, God of Tyranny, the God of Murder can be ruled out. After he fell into madness and was sealed, the churches basically disappeared, and the temples were almost destroyed. After all, his main enemy was the King of the Dead. The God of Death, Hell, is still alive. If this is his temple, it is impossible for it to be abandoned. We can basically rule it out. The God of Slaughter is out of the question. He has too many enemies. It's hard to leave such a large temple. Then the biggest possibilities are the King of Bones and the God of Tyranny. The King of Bones was Mirko, the second generation of the God of Death. After he fell, Clemvox took over the death godhood. The God of Tyranny was the predecessor of the Dread Lord. After he was replaced by the Dread Lord, he disappeared in history. This temple had the most to do with the two of them. Soren went through the passage on the first floor. Following the short flight of stairs, little lights began to appear in front of him. Some strange puppets appeared in Soren's sight. They wore black metal armor and stood still in the corner. Skeletal guards? Soren glanced and saw the skeletons under the armor. These were skeletal guards with a challenge rating of 12. They were life forms made by high-grade undead. Most of them were powerful warriors when they were alive. Looks like the King of Bones, as temple. Soren went around from the side. After entering the second floor of the God of Death's ruins, some undead guards began to appear in front of him. At the same time, there was a strange cauldron at a certain distance. The cauldron was full of dark green liquid. From time to time, translucent wraiths would emerge from it. The Death Cauldron? Is someone extracting the essence of souls here? Soren had seen this strange cauldron before in the God of Death, Naruto's temple. It could be used to extract the essence of souls in a simple way. It was similar to the method of raising poisonous insects. A bunch of low-quality souls would be placed in the cauldron to cook. In the end, one could obtain a high-quality soul or a soul fragment that could be purified. Refining souls could only be done in the God of Death's temple. There were a total of 13 cauldrons. There were undead guards nearby. The passage on the side was filled with bones. Some souls would enter the pile of bones. After a while, a skeleton warrior would crawl out. Damn. This place has become a production line for the undead. Soren saw a portal through the mist in front of him. A strong death energy was emitted from it. This place was connected to a certain place in the underworld. This temple had already established a passage to the underworld. So many souls? Could it be that there is a soul furnace below? At this moment, Soren seemed to think of something. His face changed slightly. He murmured, "Could this be the place where the adventurers found the 1,000 Souls head after the end of the Avatar crisis?" In an instant, a little memory that had been sealed for a long time flashed through Soren's mind. It was about 3 months after the end of the Avatar crisis. A team of legendary adventurers explored the Desert of Death in the Eastern Kingdom. They swept through 3 underground ruins in the Desert of Death in a row. The most difficult battle was in the second Death Ruin. In this Death Ruin they encountered the Demigod Lich and the 1,000 Souls head. In the end they found the soul furnace, left by a fallen god of death. Of course, the real discovery was probably more than that. However, what they released was definitely the most basic information. As for how much benefit they had obtained, they basically wouldn't tell others everything. If it's really here, I'm afraid I have to be careful next. It seems that I need to do some preparation work. Soren stopped. In his memory, the average profession level of this team of adventurers was about level 22. They were the top veterans who had experienced high-intensity battles during the Avatar crisis. When they swept through this place, 3 of them died. In the end, they killed the Demigod Lich and the 1,000 Souls head. Although Soren now had the combat strength of a deity, he did not have much advantage over a team of legendary adventurers. If they didn't treat it seriously, they might really fail miserably in the gutter. Demigod Lich. The challenge level is level 21. He has mastered the legendary spell, Time Stop. This can deal with other legendary professions, but it has no effect on me. In addition, there are legendary spells such as Wishing, Gate Between Worlds, and Wail of the Banshee. It seems that I need to summon my demon incarnation to help in the battle. The 1,000 Souls head. The challenge level is level 20. He has mastered Aura of Fear, Necromancy, Domination, and so on. He is a half-spirit creature composed of a large number of distorted souls. He is a monster that is very difficult to kill. This is a bit troublesome. Soren frowned. His figure stopped in a corner and fell into deep thought. 2 legendary monsters with the challenge level. Even from the point of view of a deity, they are very troublesome enemies. P.S. 2 in 1 chapter. Chapter 737. The smell of death became stronger. The underground part of the ruins of the God of Death was relatively intact. It seemed that the underground space had been reserved for other purposes when it was first built. Most of the temples of the giant gods were the same. Soren's half-elf temple also had the same layout. The temple above the surface was just the tip of the iceberg. There were 3 larger floors below, each of which was reserved for certain purposes. For example, the interrogation room, the detention room, the prayer room, the confinement room, and so on. Many high-level spies from other forces who came to Mordor to wreak havoc were taken directly to the basement of the temple to be tortured by the Nightwalkers. Nightwalkers. The elite rogue order in the half-elf temple. There were only 16 members in total. All of them were above the high grade and had the ability to advance to the legendary level. They were all fanatics who were blessed by Soren. The gods had their own top force groups in their churches. The god of suffering had the broken monks, the god of mages had the council of mystics, the lady of night had the black moon monks, and the goddess of magic controlled the mysterious fire knights, the star hunters, the sons of Starfeather, and so on. Basically, most of the gods had their own top force groups inside their churches. Soren's foundation as a god was not very strong, so he had only formed a small group of Nightwalkers. This should be the interrogation room. After passing through the side corridor, it suddenly opened up a lot. There was an iron gate dug out nearby, which seemed to have been recently repaired. Soren saw some strange creatures. They were not like creatures on the surface but more like monsters in the Underdark. There were trolls in the past, but he didn't know what terrible experiments the Lich had done here. Even the trolls, who could regenerate their heads after being cut off, were half dead. There was a trace of demonic breath in the room where the trolls were held. Soren glanced and saw a scarred berserk demon. The Lich was also close to the top undead in the multiverse. It seemed that it had also caught some demons from the bottomless abyss as experimental materials. The power of the berserk demon was amazing. Ordinary iron gates could not contain it at all, so there was an energy seal on the outer layer to imprison the demon. Further ahead was a large row of iron shelves, on which hung all kinds of torture instruments. There were dissected corpses on the table, ranging from humans, dwarves, and gnolls. Some of them were even preserved in huge glass bottles. This place looked similar to the cave Soren had entered for the first time in Amber City. There were even mummies nearby. Moving forward, there was another passageway. This was where the strong chaos mana came from. It seemed like the lich Soren was looking for was down there. I have an idea. Soren quickly came up with an idea. He quietly retreated to his original position and drew his weapon. Then he saw that the energy seal that imprisoned the berserk demon had been removed. Perhaps because he had been imprisoned and tortured for too long, the berserk demon didn't realize that he was free. A moment later, it hesitantly stretched out its palm and slammed it. After being tortured for a long time, the berserk demon couldn't get rid of its chaotic nature. It rushed out of the iron gate and broke through it along with the wall. Rumble. A violent muffled sound was heard. The nearby undead guards immediately took action and quickly rushed over. The berserk demon had been imprisoned for so long and was already burning with anger. It directly crashed into an undead guard and turned it into a pile of bones on the spot. Demons were naturally very challenging, and their attributes were far superior to other creatures. These undead guardians couldn't stop it at all. At the same time, in the lower level of the ruins, in front of a huge experiment table, the lich who was conducting some kind of experiment raised its head. The lich's expression was a little confused. As a high-level undead creature, the lich had recently repaired its body. It was completely made up of bones and it attached a layer of flesh to it. Although it was only for decoration and would break in a few years, it was still a piece of flesh. It put down some kind of black crystal in its hand, looked up and murmured, "Did the demon escape? Is there a problem with the demon seal?" A berserk demon was nothing to a lich of its level, but if it was allowed to go crazy, it could definitely mess up its laboratory. Therefore it had to go up and deal with it now. Because there was still a trace of doubt in its heart, the lich was very cautious. First, it blessed itself with a spell, and then walked towards the passage on the upper floor. It suspected that someone had sneaked into its lair. Rumble. There was another dull noise, and the figure of the lich appeared on the upper floor of the laboratory. It didn't find any abnormalities except for the berserk demon that ran out of nowhere. Bone prison. With a simple undead spell, the bones on the ground immediately flew up automatically and turned into a cage, trapping the berserk demon in place. Dominate demon. Another spell appeared, and the lich in front of it planned to control it first and then lock it up again. It still needed to continue the experiment on this berserk demon. But, at this moment, a strange light suddenly appeared, followed by a figure that rushed out from the side of it. Enemy. As a lich that had just advanced to the level of a demigod, Tridendrick's reaction speed was also very fast. It almost didn't think about it and cast one of its most powerful spells. Time stop. As a high-level lich that was close to immortality, it would not let down its guard against any enemy. A lich of its level would usually start with the legendary spell Time Stop, and many of them were directly triggered spells. High-grade wizards could master powerful Accident, which could automatically activate spells that they had memorized when certain conditions were met. If he advanced to the legendary realm and mastered special supreme magic skills, he could also master the legendary level Greater Accident spell, which could instantly trigger spells of higher level and even legendary spells. Tridendrick's spell trigger condition was when he was attacked by the enemy. The faster his consciousness was, the faster the spell would be triggered. As a lich with a long lifespan, Tridendrick's spell ability was far beyond other legendary spellcasters. And this level of supreme magic skill could be said that even Gloria and the Fallen which combined couldn't compare to this demigod lich in front of him. Because as a demigod lich, he could already include Time Stop in the scope of Greater Accident. Back then, who knew how many legendary adventurer teams had been annihilated by this ability? No surprise. The enemy who was about to sneak attack him was also stopped by Time Stop in an instant. At this time, Tridendrick slowly began to prepare the next spell. The duration of Time Stop was enough for him to throw out a lot of spells and kill the enemy in front of him. Chapter 738. Time Stop. This incomparably powerful legendary spell was the trump card of top-level wizards. For any ordinary creature, the legendary wizard who had the upper hand was almost guaranteed to win. During the time when Time Stop was in effect, it was enough for a legendary wizard who had mastered casting skills to throw out a large number of spells. For a demigod lich like Tridendrick, spells below the fourth circle were almost instantaneous. If he wanted to, he could throw out dozens of spells in one go to blow the enemy into pieces. Soren was frozen in place. At least in the eyes of the demigod Lich in front of him, the legendary wanderer who had overestimated himself and tried to challenge him had somehow found his way into the death god's ruins had been fixed in place by his spell. And this time was enough for him to cast several instant death spells. With the rogue's poor immunity, Tribndrick didn't believe that the opponent could pass his instant death spell. As a powerful demigod Lich, Tribndrick's wizard level had reached 26. Even level 30 legendaries would find it difficult to escape from his instant death spells, let alone rogues. However, his long-term caution gave him an extra layer of insurance. He decided to use the spell, Banshee's Howl, to deal with the enemy in front of him. Legendary rogues were still able to dodge other spells. Soren was acting. After a long period of battle experience, he had finally stepped into the realm of acting, even though he only had a little bit of acting ability in the past. At this moment, not only did he really show the state of being affected by time stop, but his face and eyes also showed a lifelike panic. It looked like he really didn't expect to be hit by the demigod Lich's time stop spell. At this moment he was in a state of panic. What a joke. As a true god who had mastered the divine title of a half-elf and a rogue, how could Soren be affected by the effect of time stop? Most of the demigods could be immune to the effect of time stop, let alone him. At this moment it was all about acting. For a powerful enemy like the demigod Lich, Soren didn't make much of a difference if he attacked first or second because the opponent had too many spells to trigger. To deal with this kind of enemy he could only catch them off guard. Banshee's Howl. Sound wave spells were the most difficult to successfully avoid, and Banshee's Howl was one of the most dangerous ones. The demigod Lich in front of him obviously wanted to get rid of Soren once and for all, so he directly used his killer spell. However, what he didn't expect was that just when he thought that the legendary rogue in front of him had been frozen by him and could easily cast spells to kill him, a murderous intent suddenly appeared in Soren's eyes, followed by a little golden divine light. Soren's figure suddenly rushed in front of the demigod Lich, and then a cold light slashed toward his head. Dang dang dang. The sudden attack forcibly interrupted the demigod Lich's spell and caused his own magic to have a crazy backlash. As an advanced berserker and a demigod Lich who mastered chaos magic, although Tribndrick always buffed himself with the spell Chaos Shield, at this moment he felt that he could no longer control his magic. Fortunately, all the protective spells that he had memorized with accident were triggered, and he forcibly opened an energy shield to protect himself. The storm-like attack came, and the energy shield only lasted for less than half a second. In an instant, Tribndrick realized that his enemy was not an ordinary person at all because ordinary people couldn't be immune to time stop, let alone break his energy shield so easily. The curved sword made a metallic sound on the demigod Lich's body. A row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Activated Shadow Strike. You've caused 12 damage to the target. You've caused 3 shadow damage to the target. Activated Shadow Strike. You've caused 9 damage to the target. You've caused 3 shadow damage to the target. An unimaginably tough nut to crack. It was mentioned before that liches were high undead creatures, and they had incredible resistance to physical attacks. The demigod Lich was even immune to 95% of physical attacks. Soren was now in a state of full power. Not only did he activate all his buffs, even the weapon in his hand was imbued with divine power. Even so, he could only deal around 10 points of damage. It was not hard to imagine that other legendary professions would only deal single-digit damage. The demigod Lich's resistance to physical attacks was even higher than most deities. Moreover, the demigod Lich's resistance to shadow energy was also very high. Soren's Shadow Strike could deal 18 points of additional damage, but now it only dealt 3 points of shadow damage. It was too horrible to look at. Facing Soren's storm-like attacks, the demigod Lich had almost no chance of dodging. His agility and reaction speed couldn't be compared to a rogue like Soren, so he decisively chose the most effective tactic. Teleport away. The demigod Lich immediately began to cast a short-distance teleportation spell at a speed that was close to instant casting. As long as there was enough distance, he had more than 100 ways to kill the enemy in front of him. However, the teleportation spell didn't work. Dimensional Lock. Divine Power Conversion. When facing an enemy like the demigod Lich, how could Soren be reluctant to use his divine power? When he launched the attack, he had already used his divine power to activate the dimensional lock, directly blocking all teleportation spells within a 20-meter radius. Slaughter Transformation. Facing Soren's storm-like attacks, the demigod lich did not even show any signs of being heavily injured. At this time, Soren could only reveal his trump card and enter the slaughterer form that he had not used for a long time. Crackle. Soren's bones cracked. Since he succeeded in becoming a god, the number of times Soren entered the slaughter form could be counted on one hand. When he entered the slaughter form, his appearance was completely different from that of a human. He looked like an evil god. The pressure of a god emerged. The demigod lich's face finally changed because at this time, he realized that the enemy he was facing was a true god. However, he had now missed the opportunity. Soren would never give the enemy any chance in battle. Divine Power Shockwave. Since it had already come to this point, Soren simply didn't hold back at all. At the moment when he transformed into the slaughter form, the surging divine power value directly rushed out like a tide and turned into a terrible shockwave that hit the demigod lich in front of him. Divine Power Impact. This was holy damage that could ignore any resistance. P.S. From tomorrow onwards, the side story of the Queen of Succubus will be updated on the public account. The initial insertion point is the demon incarnation branch that was forced to be cut because it couldn't write more than holding hands. The side story will be updated one after another outside of the main story to make up for some missing parts of the plot, as well as part of the side story of the Queen of Succubus and the Fallen Witch. You can see it tomorrow on the public account. Chapter 739. The outcome of the battle had been decided. For a saint who was the incarnation of a god, a little chance was enough for Soren to erase any possibility of the enemy turning the tables. He would never give the demigod lich any chance to escape. Therefore, when the divine power shockwave exploded, Soren launched a second wave of attacks. This time he activated his epic divine power ability, and every attack he launched was imbued with his own divine power. This was the difference between a true god and a false god. Soren's divine power was able to completely suppress the demigod lich's power. The power of the law of divinity was able to ignore all immunity tests, and it was able to inflict real damage on the demigod lich's soul. Ah! The demigod lich's soul screamed. As a high undead with powerful immunity, the lich could no longer resist Soren's attack. With the rapid consumption of divine power, its body gradually shattered and collapsed, which meant that the body of the demigod lich was completely dying. However, this alone wasn't enough. The demigod lich kept his soul and a trace of life in his phylactery. Even if he was killed by a powerful enemy, he could still be restored through the phylactery. In this case, he would only be weakened for a short period of time before being revived. The demigod lich was dead. However, Soren did not receive any slaughter EXP, which meant that the enemy was not completely dead. Slaughter Domain. A powerful domain was activated, and Soren's sight passed through the barrier of the spiritual realm. He then slashed at a distorted soul with his curved sword. Killing the body was not enough to kill the demigod lich. Only by killing the soul could the enemy be completely defeated. No. The demigod lich's soul was torn apart by Soren's sword. The power of divinity shrouded everything nearby, and the slaughter domain suppressed its soul, completely eliminating any possibility of it escaping. At the same time, as the demigod lich's soul was killed by Soren, a crack suddenly appeared in an inconspicuous metal floating object in the astral plane, and then it instantly shattered. An intelligent and crazy demigod lich. It threw its phylactery into the sea of the astral world. If it wasn't for Soren's slaughter domain, who would be able to find its phylactery in the vast astral world and kill it? I'm afraid. The only possibility was that there was a 1 in a billion chance in the astral world that some special situation would destroy this palm-sized phylactery that was extremely sturdy and enchanted with countless spells. Without a domain related to death, even if a deity wanted to kill a lich, he would have to seal the space and completely destroy the soul. And to do so, one would need at least the strength of a mid-tier god. The lich was completely dead. At this moment, a series of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Following that, countless soul fragments entered his body, and the divine light was gradually absorbed by Soren. A very small part of it was integrated into the divine artifact machete in his hand. It was not complete yet, but it still had the possibility of further growth. Kill demigod lich. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 819,000 slaughter EXP. The target possesses divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've gained 5 divine points. The target possesses divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've gained 2 divine points. The first row of data continued to appear. However, it did not stop there. New data continued to appear below. The target possesses aura of fear. Extracting target's aura of fear. You've gained part of the information of the terror domain. You've mastered a new ability, aura of fear. The target possesses death divinity. Divinity compatibility 81%. Extracting target's remaining death divinity. You've gained part of the information of the terror domain. The real reward was yet to come. Soren could obtain the divinity and divine points provided by the demigod Lich through other channels. However, a legendary level aura and a one-time information notification of the terror domain were not something that could be provided by other enemies. There really is the remaining power of the god of death here. Soren instantly understood many things. He also knew why the demigod Lich stayed here for decades. He must be trying to find a way to integrate the death divinity here. Ordinary creatures could not integrate with the death divinity. Undead creatures had a natural advantage in this aspect. Otherwise, only people like Soren who had mastered the terror domain related to death could do so. Killing itself originated from death. Aura of fear, deity's domain. You have mastered the power of fear. When activating the terror domain, all nearby enemies must go through a compulsory test of immunity. Otherwise they will fall into all negative states caused by fear such as panic, escape, tremble, surrender and so on. The difficulty of the aura of immunity is determined by your profession level. Divinity can reduce or increase the chances of enemies passing the test of immunity. Aura of fear. This was a power that many powerful evil gods, demons and devils could master. Almost every archdemon had the ability of aura of fear. They used fear to enslave their servants. Soren's aura of fear was obviously more powerful because he had a trace of the divinity of fear. After acquiring this powerful aura of fear, Soren's gaze of fear, divinity, seemed to have disappeared. The power of this aura of fear had been integrated into the aura of fear. The second aura of fear. Soren now had the evil aura and the aura of fear. Both of them had an area of effect and did not consume any energy. It was similar to the dragon aura of a high-level dragon. The aura of fear could only be activated when the saint form was activated. However, the aura of fear did not have any requirements. One is the evil aura, and the other is the aura of fear. Soren looked at the corpse of the demigod Lich and touched his chin. He murmured, "It seems that I have mastered the 2 auras of an evil god. I'm going further and further on the path of an evil god." The battle was over. Soren quickly cleaned up the battlefield. He did not have time to identify the things he found on the corpse of the demigod Lich. He then followed the passage to the lower level of the ruins. If he remembered correctly, there was a very powerful Thousand Souls leader here. He had to kill the Thousand Souls leader to completely clean up the ancient ruins. He was also very curious about what the demigod Lich was doing down there. Chapter 740. Soren cleaned up the battlefield quickly. The demigod Lich didn't have a lot of good stuff on him, only 3 legendary equipment. A tattered robe, a magic staff that increased spellcasting speed, and a somewhat familiar ring. Soren had no use for the first 2, so he could only bring them back to Gloria to see if they could repair them. The reason why the last ring looked familiar was that it looked similar to the Lich ring that Soren had obtained before, but the magic aura on it was stronger. The demigod Lich must have enchanted it with multiple spells. Other than that, there were only a few other things left. However, these weren't the only things that were valuable to Soren. He quickly entered the underground ruins and found himself in a huge laboratory. There were all kinds of glass bottles that contained many biological organs that would make one's scalp tingle. On the left was a large alchemy table and on the right was a huge bookshelf. There were no signs of enemies and the head of 1,000 souls didn't seem to be down there. It might be somewhere else in the underground ruins. Since he was already here, Soren naturally had to take the valuable things away. He only took a look at the table and lost interest. He only took a few valuable materials such as mithril, and mithril. Damn. The demigod Lich must have gone to the Underdark to rob, because Soren found a fist-sized mithril on his table. This was half a year's worth of mithril in the Underdark. There were many other things such as adamantine, gems and dragon blood. Soren stuffed them all into his storage space. He would bring them back and let Gloria sort them out. Then it was a mess of organs. Soren looked around and felt a little disgusted, so he only took a glass bottle that seemed to contain the Elder's Eye, legendary beholder. The most important thing was at the bookshelf. The demigod lich wouldn't collect too many treasures. To him, power and knowledge were the most important things. Soren found a lot of spellbooks. There was even a spellbook that made Soren tremble a few times. He couldn't help but show a look of surprise on his face. Legendary book. This was a spellbook that recorded several legendary spells. Whoosh. Soren quickly turned a page. He glanced at the table of contents and saw the spell label. Time Stop. Banshee's Howl. Wish. Greater Accident. Sword of Destruction. Xenomorph. There were a total of 6 legendary spells in this book, which were all top-level spells that couldn't be mastered through conventional means in the current material plane. Some of them were not seen by Gloria and some of them were not even the demigod lich. Which meant that he couldn't master these legendary spells. Have the ability to use right now. These legendary spells have spells, lich. Time Stop. Soren was very happy. He murmured, if I bring it back, Gloria can also learn this legendary spell, right? Speaking of Time Stop, Soren remembered a joke. There was an adventurer who said that if he could master Time Stop, the beautiful girls on the street wouldn't even know how they got pregnant. As soon as he finished speaking, his adventurer companion next to him looked at him with a strange, mournful look. The guy didn't seem to react. At this time, a witch in the team whispered, Time Stop lasts at most 30 seconds. Pada. When Soren picked up the legendary book, a book with a rather delicate cover fell next to it. Soren raised his hand and the book fell into his palm. After flipping it open and glancing at it, his face suddenly changed again. He even looked a little ecstatic and murmured, The Book of Arcana? This wasn't a magic book. It was written in a row of characters from the Arcane Empire. It was more like a profound thesis. If one could understand it, they would be able to master some special supreme magic skills. How to memorize legendary spells with greater accident. How to chain memory with accident. How to control the trigger conditions of accident. There were only 3 titles on the book, each with a chapter and a prologue. This wasn't a magic book, but the personal notes of a grand arcanist. Why were the spellcasters of the Arcane Empire so powerful? A large part of this was because they had mastered some special supreme magical techniques. The arcanists were also far more proficient in the application of unexpected spells than anyone could imagine in this era. Chain accident. This was one of the supreme magic skills of the arcanists. They would set special conditions to trigger the chain accident, which would eventually form a chain reaction. When encountering a powerful enemy, all the preparation work would be completed in an instant. In short, one would automatically cast a large number of protective spells when encountering an enemy, while the other would need to slowly cast spells after discovering the enemy. That was the difference. The value of the arcane book in front of him might be more amazing than the legendary book. Of course, this was for the legendary spellcasters. Anything else? After discovering so many valuable things in a row, Soren simply turned the entire bookshelf upside down. Who knew how much precious knowledge this lich had collected in his long life? Soren simply took it all away after reading the last few pages. In the future, Mordor would definitely need to build a large library, and these books would be used to fill the library. After going through it so carefully, Soren really found some good things. There were a little too many necromancy books, but he didn't want to release them because many of them were too evil. But there were also some very special spells. Soren actually found the long-lost Bigby chain palms in the demigod lich's library. It was not the famous Bigby 5 consecutive palms mentioned before, but an earlier version of a low-level spell. The lowest level of Bigby 5 consecutive palms was Bigby Palms, which was a level 5 spell, and the mastery requirement was still very high. What Soren found was another set of low-level palms for battle mages. They were Bigby's Assistance Palm, level 1 spell, Bigby's Tripping Palm, level 1 spell, Bigby's Assault Fist, level 2 spell, Bigby's Guardian Palm, level 2 spell, and Bigby's Interference Palm, level 3 spell. Unbelievable. Even Soren didn't expect that the demigod lich would have such a long-lost spell book. Why were there no battle mages now? It was because these low-level battle spells had all been lost. The entry level for battle mages was Bigby Palms of Protection. If you could use level 5 spells, why would you still want to be a battle mage? First become a level 5 mage, then advance to a battle mage and learn close-range casting skills from the beginning. It was too stupid. P.S. The first chapter of the extra volume will be updated on the public account today. The plot starts from the disappearance of the succubus queen. It will be updated around 8 or 9 o'clock. The extra volume is about 100,000 to 150,000 words. Chapter 741. Mordor City, Port Area. A melodious bell suddenly came from the lighthouse, and then the bell gradually became faster. Then someone ran over from the dock and said excitedly, "Fish! Fish migration. This year's fish migration has begun. It's less than 50 kilometers away from Mordor City." This sound seemed to ignite the entire port area. Immediately, many people rushed over from all directions. After a few questions, a person dressed as a captain immediately shouted, "Call for help! Hurry up and get those drunkards out of the tavern for me. Prepare a big net. Gather people. I'm going to the sea temple now. We're going out to sea right away." The port area suddenly became lively. Even the city hall of Mordor City was busy. Many officials came to the port area. Even the navy stationed in Mordor City was mobilized. Battleships were replaced with giant nets, and then they began to gather sailors to go out to sea. Fish migration. This was one of the most spectacular scenes in Mordor City. It was also a harvest feast for coastal cities like Mordor City. The scale of overseas fish migration was simply incredible. Basically, it had reached the point where a fishing net could be thrown down and it would be too full to be dragged. In the face of the arrival of the fish migration, the sea temple moved very quickly. The priest in charge of the temple immediately realized that this was an opportunity to expand their faith. The Naga sirens rarely appeared in front of the mortals and temporarily built a small altar in the dock area. The sea goddess blessed the city and promised that there would be a good harvest for 3 years, so this time the scale of the fish migration was even larger. This even alarmed Gloria, who had just finished an experiment. With the skyrocketing population of Mordor City, the food rationing was naturally a little tight. Now was the spring planting season, which was a time of shortage. The price of food on the mainland soared. Although Mordor City had stocked up a lot of food, it was not suitable to buy from other places. Fly. Gloria waved her hand, signaling the officials who came to report to leave and let them handle this matter. Then she flew into the air and flew towards the sea. The outer islands were dangerous. Even something like the migration of fishes required some powerhouses to oversee it. This was because a school of fish represented an abundance of food. This food was very likely to attract the deep-sea beasts to feast on it. This was a feast to be shared. If they were careless and provoked, these deep-sea beasts might attack the fleet. Ships set sail one after another. The navy of Mordor City was also moving quickly, while a group of officials in the city hall were biting their pens and thinking about how to formulate taxes. The rich catch was a blessing from the goddess of the ocean. This was a gift unique to the city of Mordor. It was certain that the fishing boats that went out to sea this time had a big harvest, but these harvests could not be given to those people. They had to pay the corresponding taxes. There had to be a certain level of taxation, or else it would cause dissatisfaction among the lower class. This was a test of their ability. Soren's philosophy was not to collect more taxes, but to exploit and oppress. There had to be some leftovers for the lower class. They had to come up with a tax plan that others could accept. The boundless sea. Gloria's figure quickly flew into the depths of the sea. Behind her were thousands of ships. Even some small boats were going out to sea, ready to make a fortune. Farther away, even the sky was covered with silver-white scales. These scales stretched for more than 10 kilometers. At this moment, they were gradually approaching the port of Mordor. This was not the length of the school of fish. What Gloria saw was only the width of the school of fish. When she flew higher, she immediately saw the endless silver-white scales spreading on the sea. Countless fish leaped out of the sea, reflecting brilliant light under the sun. This was a scene filled with shock and magnificence. Even Gloria could not help but be shocked. She had never seen such a spectacular scene. Waves were flying. Outside the school of fish were groups of sharks. They swam around endlessly. They could easily catch prey with a casual attack. These sharks would migrate with the school of fish. When this huge school of fish dispersed, they would stop this feast. Huge tentacles appeared in the sea on the right side. Giant octopuses lurked at the bottom of the sea and devoured fish crazily. This was the most relaxing time of the year for them. They could eat until they couldn't eat anymore. There are at least 5 deep-sea giant beasts. Gloria glanced around, and her expression gradually became serious. The deep-sea giant beasts would not move with the school of fish. They would ambush and eat where the school of fish passed by. As long as they were careful to avoid them, the sharks would not threaten the fleet of Mordor. Closer. Closer and closer. When the fleet saw the first batch of approaching fish, many sailors could not help but open their mouths in surprise. This was only the front part. On both sides of the ship, there were schools of fish swimming. From time to time there were fish leaping out of the water. Nearby were dolphins that were eating their fill. They carefully distanced themselves from the ship. Farther away, some tiger sharks appeared. The lookout took a look with a monocular and shouted, "Shark man! There are traces of shark man over there." The captain also looked at it, and then his expression gradually calmed down and said, "Don't panic. They are also here to hunt fish. These guys drive some prey from the school of fish to their territory every year." Hundreds of tiger sharks emerged from the sea. The Sharkman cautiously kept a sufficient distance from the city of Mordor, and then avoided the deep-sea giant beasts. They used the unique way of their race to separate apart from the left side of the school of fish, and then drove the school of fish away under the leadership of the priest. They used a special sound wave to guide the school of fish and directly took away tens of millions of fish. This kind of thing will continue to happen on the way of the migration of fish. Sharkman, dark-scaled Naga, tidal fishmen, Amazon warriors, and so on. Every race near the overseas area will enjoy a feast during the migration of fish. Cast the net. Cast the net. Idiot. Wait a minute. The silver-scaled fish behind are more valuable. Wait for their school to come over and cast the net. Angry roars rose one after another. Large nets were cast one after another, and the hold of the ship was almost emptied. Some small fishing boats had only cast the net 3 times, and they were completely full. They could only rush to the port, planning to unload the fish and come back a few more times. There were too many fish. Some of the half-grown boys could reach into the water and catch a stingray that weighed 3 to 5 pounds. It stretched for hundreds of miles. No one knew if it was because of the blessing of the sea goddess, but this year's fish migration could be said to be spectacular to the epic level. A net that was cast down would catch over 100 caddies of fish. In less than half an hour, many ships were completely unable to carry the fish. In the end, a large number of ships began to frantically return. The port area had already been cleared and a large amount of space had been opened up. The first ships to return directly used wooden buckets to carry the fish and threw them at the dock. The clerks of the port of Mordor were so happy that they couldn't close their mouths. They took pens and recorded quickly. Now there was no time to count what fish they had caught, so they could only carry it in piles. Suddenly, a clerk looked up at the sky over the city of Mordor, and then he opened his mouth wide with a shocked expression. He didn't even notice that the quill pen fell to the ground. A high-pitched dragon's roar sounded. A shadow dragon that had just reached adulthood rose into the air from somewhere in Motor City, then it flapped its huge dragon wings and flew high. The dragon's roar was mixed with a cheerful aura. It rushed towards the fish in the distance like crazy. It dived directly into the bottom of the sea, and then rushed out from the bottom of the sea. A gust of wind whistled. The figures of the Quetzalcoatlus also rose into the air. This was a feast for everyone. The Dragon Knights of Mordor City also released their mounts to let them have a good meal. Chapter 742. The harvest ceremony was still going on. In less than half a day the port of Mordor City was full. All the oak barrels that could be collected had been used up, and they could only be piled up in the open space of the dock. The officials of Mordor City now had a headache about how to preserve these catches. In the end, they had no choice but to ask the priests and wizards of the temple to set up a magic circle to preserve them at a relatively low temperature. Later there was no other way. They could only let the catch pile up and send people to mobilize salt to get a batch of salted fish first. There was a fishy smell over the entire port of Mordor. Now everyone could only endure the pain and happiness. After all, such a harvest opportunity only came once or twice a year. The Sea Temple was the big winner of this fish migration. For a long time, the Sea Temple had been suppressed by the Temple of Wealth in the competition of Port Mordor because their opponents were really much richer than them. But today the situation was really reversed. The number of people sacrificed in the Sea Temple had skyrocketed. Many people ran to donate and pray to thank the sea goddess for her gift. Now thinking about the pale face of Priest Jean, the Naga Siren priest who was in charge of the Sea Temple couldn't help laughing out loud. She was now ambitious. She was ready to take advantage of this opportunity to completely suppress the Temple of Wealth. Everything was still busy. However, after the huge school of fish passed about 10 kilometers outside the port of Mordor, it began to quietly change a little. the school of fish began to diverge. This time, the fish migration was not the same as in previous years. Most of the fish migrating in previous years were of a single species, and there would not be too many species of fish occasionally showing signs of convergence. But this time there were almost all kinds of fish. It seemed that all the fish that would migrate during this period of time had passed through the city of Mordor. But, after passing through the city of Mordor, these fish began to change. The fish at the front were divided into 3 groups. One group continued to migrate in the direction of the Amazon rainforest, another group moved towards the southern sea, and the last group continued to migrate in a straight line. All this seemed to be controlled by a great force, forcing them to pass by the city of Mordor. Then these fish migrated according to their original route. Desert of Death, underground ruins. What happened in Mordor City was not enough for Gloria to send a magic message. What he was busy with now was to plunder the treasures of the demigod Lich. All the books had to be taken away. Take away all the valuable experimental tools, but leave behind the strange organs used for undead experiments. These things were too disgusting. It took Soren more than an hour to finish cleaning up. By then, more than half of the laboratory was empty. Where is the head of 1,000 souls? Soren stood in front of the experiment table and frowned. He muttered, "Is this thing not nearby?" Under normal circumstances, a legendary monster that was formed from a large number of twisted souls had a trace of divinity, and Soren would never complain about having too much divinity. Finding and killing the head of 1,000 souls was a very meaningful task. After Soren made sure that there was no head of 1,000 souls here, he decided to return to the next floor. In front of him was a strange soul boiler. Soren thought for a moment and used his divine power to seal the soul within. Then he brought a sample back. This thing was often used by the evil gods to extract souls and then make powerful servants. He could take it back and study it a little. Many gods of death who were not strong enough would use this kind of boiler to extract excellent souls and finally turn these souls into their own servants because there were not enough powerful professionals in the church that served them. It was basically impossible for the gods of death to do everything by themselves. In the eyes of mortals, those who held huge scythes were the servants of death. Soren walked around the underground ruins and cleaned up a few skeletal undead along the way. Finally, he found a clue in a dark tunnel because he could faintly hear the mournful wailing of souls. It should be here. Soren carefully cast a spell on himself and then went into stealth. It was an empty hall. There were piles of bones in front of him, and there was a huge furnace in front of him. Or rather, it was a fireplace. There was no fuel in it and there was only a pile of bones under it. Blue flames danced in it, and he could faintly hear the wails of countless undead. There was a large ceiling circle around the wall and a 9-pointed star circle on the ground. These should have been left by the demigod Lich. Soul furnace? Soren took a look and determined what the thing in front of him was. This should be the legendary soul furnace. The head of 1,000 souls was inside. Soren could feel a strong undead aura. The demigod Lich had sealed the soul furnace in some way and then constantly extracted the divine energy in it. This power may have come from the head of 1,000 souls, or it may have come from the soul furnace itself. I must break the seal first. Soren slashed the wall with his sword. As the ceiling circle was destroyed by the divine power, an ear-piercing scream sounded in an instant. Black gas filled the air. Countless ghostly flames ignited on the bones around and finally gathered in front of the soul furnace, turning into a twisted mass of countless undead with a vague humanoid outline. Head of 1,000 souls? When the head of 1,000 souls gathered, a row of data appeared crazily, affected by fear aura. Test of will passed. You are immune to the negative effects of this aura. Affected by chaotic aura? Test of immunity failed. Within the range of this aura, all your tests of immunity are reduced by 2 points. Head of 1,000 souls. As the name suggested, it was a monster formed by more than 1,000 souls. This kind of thing often had an extremely chaotic will. Even if there was a strong consciousness leading the body, it would also be affected by other souls. 2 aura realms. Soren's expression was a lot more dignified. In an instant, he activated his Shadow Realm and Slaughter Realm, and then mobilized his Divine Power Points to slash at it. Divine Power Points must not be saved. Soren had planned to temporarily use up all his Divine Power Points because the head of 1,000 souls was a creature between incorporeal and corporeal. In the face of any physical attack, there was a 50% chance of phase evasion. Any physical attack only had a 50% chance of hitting it. But this was not the most disgusting thing. What was more disgusting was that the head of 1,000 souls, as a collection of high-level wraiths, had extremely high resistance and immunity to any magic attack. It belonged to the kind of monster that had a very rare foundation of double resistance. Against this kind of monster, both physical attacks and magic attacks were not very effective. Only the power of a deity could cause real damage. Chapter 743. Sizzle. 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 The moment Soren and the head of 1,000 souls clashed, something unprecedented happened. Time had to stop here. First of all, after encountering the head of 1,000 souls, Soren first slashed at it, but because of the particularity of the head of 1,000 souls, its body directly transformed from a solid to a virtual body, and then it dodged. Then, Soren realized that this monster could not be defeated easily with normal physical attacks. This was because when he activated the slaughter domain, he added some divine power to his weapon and used it to attack the enemy. This time, the head of 1,000 souls could not dodge the attack with its half-spirit body. It screamed in pain as it was struck by Soren's sword. However, at this moment something strange happened. Soren's sword landed on the head of 1,000 souls' body. While dealing damage to the enemy, a row of data appeared in front of his eyes. Target hit. You've dealt 36 plus 24 divine power, / damage to the target. Extracting soul energy from the target. You've received 3,600 slaughter EXP. Target hit. You've dealt 39 plus 24 divine power, / damage to the target. Extracting soul energy from the target. You've received 3,900 slaughter EXP. It was very strange. This was the first time Soren gained slaughter EXP by attacking without killing the enemy. Every time he struck, he would tear a part of the head of 1,000 souls' soul. This was because it was originally a monster formed from thousands of twisted souls. Soren's current situation was that he had not killed it yet, but every time he attacked it, he would gain some slaughter EXP, and then the death aura of the enemy would weaken a little. After slashing the target more than 10 times in a row, the aura of the 1,000 souls chieftain was not only getting weaker and weaker, but Soren also directly gained more than 30,000 slaughter EXP. What's going on? At this moment, even Soren himself did not understand. He thought to himself, is it because of the information I just received from the death domain? Domain ability. Although he hadn't fully grasped the power of the domain of death, some powerful domains could also increase his strength after obtaining the information once, resulting in some inconspicuous effects. This should be related to the information in the death domain, or maybe it was related to the slaughter domain. The battle was still going on. This unexpected discovery was not enough to make Soren panic. After activating his own ability, Soren relied on the powerful crushing power of the gods to not give the 1,000 souls chieftain any chance. He planned to use his divine power to get rid of this dangerous enemy. The head of 1,000 souls aura became stronger. When Soren's final slash, the 1,000 souls' body of 1,000 souls wailed suddenly. And many souls rushed out of the head's body of 1,000 souls' twisted body. As souls as after souls body, a soul of 1,000 souls. Then. Heads. Heads. A list. Head killed head. Head of 1,000 souls was killed. Extracting target's soul energy. You've received 75,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 4 divine points. Target has divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 2 divine points. The head of 1,000 souls last slash did not give much slaughter EXP. Maybe it had already absorbed part of the souls. However, the notifications didn't stop there. New notifications continued to appear below. Target has Spirit of Fear. Extracting target's Spirit of Fear. You've received part of the information in the Fear domain. Your new ability, Spirit of Fear, has been improved. Ability Breakthrough. You've mastered a new domain, Fear. Target has Divine Power of Death. Divine Power Compatibility 86%. Extracting target's remaining Divine Power of Death. You've received part of the information in the Death domain. Discovered Divine Power of Death. Divine Power Compatibility 89%. Extracting Divine Power of Death from the Soul Furnace. You've received part of the information in the Death domain. Ability breakthrough. You've mastered a new domain, death. Divine power awakened. Because you've mastered the death domain, you've automatically mastered the divine power, hand of death. A series of densely packed notifications appeared. Soren's improvement from the head of 1,000 souls was much greater than the demigod Lich. He had absorbed part of the divine power of the Son of Fear. It could even be said that the Son of Fear was his first stepping stone. Now, from the demigod Lich and the head of 1,000 souls, these two monsters with Spirit of Fear, Soren had obtained the information in the Fear domain twice. Therefore, he directly mastered a new domain ability, Fear. Of course, this was not a big deal. What was more amazing was the information in the Death domain from the demigod Lich, and the other two from the head of 1,000 souls and the Soul Furnace. These three information notifications directly fulfilled the prerequisite to master the Death domain. Although it was only a basic mastery for a god like Soren, it was enough to extend his Death domain with a type of divine power, Hand of Death. In simple words, this was a weakened version of the Life and Death domain. It could wipe out any mortal with strength below the legendary level. Any mortal. No matter if it was an elf, dwarf, human, demon, devil, or any other life form, as long as their strength did not exceed the legendary level, as long as they were still mortal, Soren could directly wipe out their lives. There was no immunity test. There was no need to trigger any immunity test. Even if the target's vitality was as tenacious as a giant dragon, Soren could wipe them out with just a thought. This was the terrifying part of the Death domain. Of course, these were some of the most basic abilities. The domain was only the starting point of mastering the divine power. Soren's understanding of the Death domain was probably not as good as the weakest Death servant. This was because many Death servants also had the Death domain. The domain was only an extension of the legendary level. There was still a big gap between it and the real divine power. Chapter 744. With the death of the head of 1,000 souls, the energy on the soul furnace became mixed. The remaining energy was not needed by Soren. Because there were too many souls, his consciousness was too messy. This was an extremely impure energy. Perhaps it was very attractive to the demons of the chaotic camp, but to Soren, it was almost like poison. The divine energy had been completely devoured by him. The slaughter domain was so thirsty for the power of the gods that there was almost no possibility of leaving any behind. The ghostly flames that were burning around gradually extinguished. As the last bit of power left by the gods was absorbed by Soren, this place was really abandoned. An inconspicuous statue appeared in front of him. Soren glanced at it and confirmed its identity. This was indeed the temple of the King of Bones. Of course, if it was according to the old name, it should be one of the three gods of death, the former King of the Dead, Weep Devil. The three gods of death were the god of murder, Baal, the King of the Dead, Weep Devil, and the god of strife, Banon. This was their name when they were still alive. After their death, their clergy was taken over by others, and their names became the god of slaughter, the King of Bones, and the god of tyranny. This was mainly to distinguish the new gods who took over their clergy later. For example, the King of the Dead, Clemvox, and the god of murder who was sealed and had gone crazy. A long time ago, there were three incomparably powerful humans. They were Bar, Devil Weep, and Banon. These three humans had challenged countless experts and climbed out of the gates of hell time and time again. They had even killed one of the 7 lost ancient gods, and each of them obtained a portion of the divine power. Finally, these mortals attracted the attention of a very powerful existence. It was the god of death, Jianghu, who was most likely to have the greater divine power. This ancient god of death was tired of his position. He divided his divine power into 3 parts and gave it to the 3 mortals who found him at that time, which later became the 3 gods of death, the most powerful axis of the gods of the evil camp. It was impossible to estimate how powerful the god of death, Jianghu, was because he was affected by the Avatar crisis. He was a little beyond the 3 realms and not in the 5 elements. He divided his priesthood and divine power into 3 parts, directly creating 3 incomparably powerful evil gods. Then, Jianghu retained his own divinity and helped the 3 gods of death to adapt to their own divinity and divine power. Later on, he even assisted the current King of the Dead, Clemvox. Even if death god Jianghu wasn't a greater divine power, Soren guessed that he wasn't far from it. Right now, the 3 gods of death had fallen one after another, and Jianghu seemed to have retired for some time. After all, the King of the Dead had gradually grasped his own divinity and work. However, the power he left behind did not disappear. The core power of massacre was still in the sealed body of the murder god, and the power of death was controlled by the King of the Dead. Although the Dread Lord had died, most of his power was still in the Dread Throne of the Bottomless Abyss. Interesting. The two previous Avatar crises, as the core that stirred the multiverse, were both related to the powerful forces left behind by Death God Jurgil. His power was enough to create 3 great divine power gods. Death God Jurgil. There were very few legends about him, but many adventurers believed in a conspiracy theory that the Grim Reaper had given up his power not because he was tired of it, but because he was guarding against an even more terrifying existence. For example, another greater divine power god. There were very few ancient gods among the existing gods. Even Mother Earth and Father Oak were gods that were born in the material plane. In other words, there were only ancient gods of their level in the material plane. Before that, there were more ancient gods in the multiverse. There were still many empty places in the pantheon, such as the gods who created the material plane, the gods who fought against the first generation of demons, and the gods who created the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. Note, creating a plane is the standard to measure a greater divine power. The multiverse was huge. Wandering in the astral world was too time-consuming for the gods, and there were many mysteries that even the gods were exploring. The 3 gods of death. Soren silently looked at the statue in front of him. To be honest, his relationship with the 3 gods of death was too deep, and it could even be said that they were tied together. He definitely inherited a trace of the bloodline of the god of massacre, and Vivian was the child of the Dread Lord. Now Soren gathered the domains of massacre, death, and fear. These 3 powers were the core domains of the 3 gods of death. Because of Vivian, Soren and the Dread Lord were irreconcilable enemies. Because of the bloodline of massacre, Soren and the god of massacre could not get along well. No. Among the successors of the 3 gods of death, only the King of the Dead, who was relatively easy to get along with, had no hostile relationship with Soren for the time being. However, if he knew that Soren had close contact with the goddess of magic, his attitude would not be so good. Death, massacre, fear. Soren seemed to see the road ahead and the key to how to completely defeat the Dread Lord. He might even end the Avatar crisis, or at least greatly reduce the damage caused by the Avatar crisis. The Avatar crisis broke out. The power of the 3 gods of death would fall to the mortal world. The King of the Dead fell in the middle of the Avatar crisis. Although the Dread Lord died, the throne of fear left in the bottomless abyss would not move. The time when the god of murder fell to the mortal world was uncertain, but it would not be much later than the other gods. As a result, Soren really had the opportunity to combine the 3 gods of death into one. Of course, it was impossible to do this with his own strength. It could even be said that there was not even a 1 in 10,000 chance. Soren needed more allies, more help, and more trump cards. He might need a divine system as a backing to be able to fight against those powerful opponents who had mastered the 3 gods of death. Massacre, death, fear, evil, rule, pirates, shadow, plants. Soren silently looked at the realms he had mastered now. Except for the pirate realm and its plant realm, which were not very useful at the moment, all the other realms complemented each other. This was the foundation of his future promotion to a great divine power. But even if he was promoted to a great divine power, he would only have the same power as his opponent. Soren had to rely on the power of other great divine powers to defeat his opponent. He needed allies. At least strong allies with mid-level divine powers. Their relationship must be better than the current goddess of sea and the goddess of wealth, because these 2 goddesses could not help Soren against other gods at the moment. The goddess of magic may be able to help, but the premise was that she could survive this crisis of death. Chapter 745. The battle was basically over. Soren had obtained more than 1,300,000 slaughter EXP from this exploration of the ruins. Together with the slaughter EXP he had accumulated before, he now had a total of 1,600,000 slaughter EXP. There was nothing to think about. Soren's priority was still to level up as an arcanist because he had to reach level 17 as soon as possible. This way he could use the power of the goddess of magic to resolve the conflict between arcanists and wizards. Once he reached level 17 he would be able to master the first level 9 spell slot. Since the destruction of the Arcane Empire, the boundary between level 9 spells and legendary spells had been blurred a lot. Although many spells were only level 9 spells according to the standards of the material plane, they were called legendary spells. Soren was blessed by the goddess of magic, so after reaching level 17 he could use not only one level 9 spell slot, but two. This was a huge improvement. Naturally, Soren had one more level 9 spell slot than others. The total number of spell slots that Soren had surpassed many wizards who were level 20 and above. A row of data appeared in front of his eyes. Arcanist profession increased to level 6. Received 34 INT 26 plus INT 26 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 12, profession HP 4 plus, con 26 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Received 1 free attribute point. One more level. Soren silently looked at his attribute page. He still had 500,000 slaughter EXP left, but he needed 1,300,000 slaughter EXP to level up. Now that he was about to enter the ranks of advanced legendary professions, he would need more and more slaughter EXP in the future. If he wanted to fight against a greater god, he would need to reach level 35 and above. This was a huge amount of slaughter EXP. Conservatively speaking, he would need more than 30 million slaughter EXP. I'll be able to master level 9 spells soon. For a wizard, level 9 spells were a watershed. After mastering level 9 spells, one's combat power would be greatly increased. Moreover, level 9 spells such as Banshee's Howl and Meteor Burst could greatly make up for Soren's lack of AoE damage. Otherwise, if he were to rely on himself to kill his enemies one by one, he would be at a disadvantage if he were to encounter a large number of monsters, such as a sea of insects. Divine power points could be used for AoE attacks, but it wasn't easy to accumulate them. The priests who believed in Soren could not reduce the divine spells bestowed upon them, and the power of the kingdom of God could not be mobilized. Soren had to be very careful when it came to divine power. Furthermore, if it wasn't for his divine power points, Soren wouldn't have been able to win this battle so easily. Only those with divine power points could be considered gods. Without divine power, a god in the form of a saint would only be a slightly more powerful legendary figure. There was no need to think about the free attribute points. Soren directly allocated it to his dexterity. Now that his dexterity had reached an astonishing 35 points, if he could increase it to 40 points, his highest attribute would be enough to be on par with many mid-level divine power gods. As for increasing it to more than 45 points, it was impossible for him to think about it for the time being, because only greater divine power gods would have a main attribute as high as 45 points. Moreover, most of these gods relied on the power of divinity and the power of divinity. My divinity is now 85 points. My divinity is now 35 points. My divinity is close to mid-level divinity, but my divinity is now completely insufficient. There are many creatures with divinity, but there are still too few with divinity. I'm afraid that in the future, I'll have to kill gods to increase my divinity. How do those gods who have been sealed as gods for a long time increase their divinity? Soren's divinity was seriously insufficient. He didn't know if other gods were like this, but their divinity was far higher than their divinity. The chances of obtaining divinity in battle were relatively high, but the chances of obtaining divinity were very low. Usually, only special enemies could obtain divinity. The other gods had been sealed as gods for a long time, and with the help of time and the power of divinity, they had slowly made up for the shortcoming of divinity. However, Soren had only been sealed as a god for a short period of time, and now his divinity was almost twice as high as his divinity. With the death of the demigod Lich, the underground ruins were completely out of control. The skeletons that were under his control had now become wild monsters, and basically, they would take the initiative to attack any living thing they saw. Since Soren was already here, he planned to harvest these skeletons, which would at least give him tens of thousands of slaughter EXP. Soren didn't know if it was an illusion or not. He felt that after killing these skeletons, the slaughter EXP he obtained had increased by about 10% compared to when he first started. This increase wasn't very obvious. However, according to Soren's own calculations and his long-term experience, the slaughter EXP he obtained from killing skeletons had indeed increased, and the increase should be between 5% and 10%. Could it be because of the death domain? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought and murmured, according to past inferences, as long as it's related to the soul, the slaughter EXP obtained can be increased. This is equivalent to increasing the ratio of absorbing soul energy, and it's said that under certain circumstances, the slaughter EXP obtained can be increased by an additional 20%. Without a doubt. The slaughter EXP obtained had indeed increased. Perhaps it would only increase by a few hundred points each time, but a little makes a mickle, and it shouldn't be underestimated. Soon. The monsters in the underground ruins were almost all cleared out by Soren. After killing all the skeletons, Soren did a little calculation, and was surprised to find that he had obtained about 100,000 slaughter EXP. If he had the chance to farm some more, it wouldn't take long for him to be able to learn a level 9 spell. Basically, there were no more monsters. Soren walked around the underground ruins and finally confirmed that he had killed all the monsters. Then he collected a little bit of gold and silver, and planned to leave the ruins of the God of Death. There were many ruins in the Eastern Kingdom. Although it was very dangerous and some of them could even kill the gods, there were still many that could make Soren challenge them. He was going to go back and take a rest. Then he would make his presence known to the girl named Alice. It would be best if he could gain some favorability and find a way to trick her back to Motor City. Then Gloria would get the core knowledge about the Arcane Empire from her. He couldn't give up the Golem Legion. During the Arcane Empire, the mortals could challenge the gods because of the huge Golem Legion. Its scale could even be compared to the petitioners in the Kingdom of God. The great Arcanists could challenge the Kingdom of God during the Avatar Crisis because of the huge energy of the elemental fusion in the floating city and the large-scale Golem Legion. It was precisely because the energy of the floating city was comparable to a small Kingdom of God that the gods were very afraid of the great Arcanists. Chapter 746. Soren quickly returned to the town. What made him feel a little regretful was that the girl named Alice, who he wanted to make her presence known, seemed to have left this place. This girl's status was very high. She probably only stayed in this place and wouldn't stay here on a regular basis. Moreover, this was just a very ordinary town. For a legendary level golem master, it wasn't very attractive. However, surprisingly, Soren managed to get some interesting information from the tavern dancer. It seemed that a divine artifact had appeared in the Eastern Kingdom. The flail. A legendary flail that was rumored to have the power to easily destroy other legendary level weapons. Currently, the entire Eastern Kingdom was in turmoil. Many forces were looking for and fighting for this divine artifact. However, no one knew where the divine artifact was. The only thing that could be confirmed was that a very powerful divine artifact had appeared. The flail? Soren couldn't help but be startled when he heard the news. This was because there were very few divine artifacts like the flail. The first thing that came to his mind was the broken part of the divine artifact that he had. Could it be the flail of time? The more Soren thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. This was because the flail of time was one of the most powerful divine artifacts in the material plane. It was also famous for its high armor penetration. It had a shocking destructive effect on any equipment below the divine artifact level. It was because the flail of time was too powerful that it was taken apart again and scattered all over the world. It wasn't strange for the flail of time to appear in the Eastern Kingdom. This was because the Eastern Kingdom used to be the core of the civilization. It can't really be the flail of time, right? Do you want to fight for it yourself? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. The flail of time wasn't any weaker than the Holy Avenger. However, this weapon wasn't very suitable for Soren. Although he could use the flail of time with the help of omnipotent hands, it wasn't a suitable weapon for him. However, the flail of time was too powerful. It would be a pity to just give it up. Moreover, Soren already had a part of it. As long as the 3 parts of the flail of time were gathered, its combat power would surpass most ordinary divine artifacts. One shackled head was an elemental attack. Once the 3 parts of the chains of time were gathered, they would be able to attack with 3 different elements at the same time. Even a god couldn't defend against all of them. This godly item was famous for its amazing ability to break through defenses. If the attributes of all 5 heads were gathered, then the final age flail would be able to attack the enemy with 5 different attributes at the same time. Even against a legendary profession, the damage would be close to crushing. Soren had the tracking divinity. In theory, as long as he found traces related to the flail of time, he would be able to use the power of his priesthood to locate his target. During the Avatar Crisis, divine artifacts were born one after another. If Soren had 2 shackled heads in his possession, he would only need to find 1 more to obtain a divine artifact of at least tier 3. This was a divine artifact. Even if it wasn't suitable for him, it would be a pity to give it up. She seemed to be unwilling to give up. After giving it some thought, Soren decided to pay attention to this matter first. The temporal flail was shockingly powerful, and it was the only divine weapon he had ever seen that was comparable to the Holy Avenger. If possible, it was better to think of a way to snatch it. Since Alice had left this place, Soren didn't need to stay here any longer. He could travel around the Eastern Kingdom to see if he could find any valuable relics that weren't life-threatening. At the same time, he also needed to pay attention to the news about the temporal flail. With so many people fighting for this divine artifact, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. Since there was still time, Soren also identified the ring on the demigod Lich's body. It was very surprising. It was also a divine artifact, but it was only the lowest tier 1 divine artifact. Item type, Gus ring, +1, item grade, tier 1 divine artifact, item description. This is a ring made by a famous demigod lich. Later on, it was enchanted by other liches. It is engraved with an extremely complex magic array. It can make the user immune to all poisons and diseases. At the same time, it can make the user immune to most charm spells and mind control spells. A special alchemy technique was used on this ring. It could strengthen the spellcaster's ability and increase their casting speed by 1 second when casting any spell. Requirements: none. Equipment effect 1. Poison immunity. This ring has a special power. It can make the wearer immune to any poison attack. No matter if it's an alchemy poison, a natural poison, or a poison attack caused by magic, the wearer will be completely immune to the damage caused by them, as well as other negative statuses such as paralysis, rigidity, and so on. Equipment effect 2. Disease immunity. This ring has a special power. It can make the wearer immune to any disease attack. No matter if it's a disease caused by magic or a disease infected by oneself, the wearer will not be affected in any way. Even the most terrible plague can't threaten the wearer of this ring. Any disease spells will be ineffective against the wearer. Equipment effect 3. Immune to most charm and mind control spells. Equipment effect 4. Increase casting speed by 1 point. Equipment effect 5. 1 additional level 6 spell slot, 1 additional level 7 spell slot, and 1 additional level 8 spell slot. Equipment effect 6. Greater haste, can be used twice a day. Equipment effect 7. Increase magic resistance by 10 points. Equipment effect 8. Increase regenerative ability. Base HP recovery rate per hour +1. Equipment effect 9. Defense level +2. Damn. After looking at the attributes of the Gus ring, Soren's expression suddenly became a little awkward. Most of the lich rings in this world were similar. In simple terms, the lich ring was a kind of enchantment alchemy process. There would be a big difference depending on the strength of the lich who made it. However, most of the basic abilities were similar. The +5 lich ring that Soren obtained before had a curse effect. It had a lot of similar abilities as the Gus ring. However, the Gus ring was more powerful. It didn't have a curse effect, nor would it reduce constitution. It also increased the number of times he could use greater haste, and had an additional level 8 spell slot. Other than that, there weren't any other differences. This was basically the +5 version of the lich ring. Because of the power of divinity, the effect was much better. Forget it. It increased my casting speed by 1 point, as well as a level 6 spell slot, a level 7 spell slot, and a level 8 spell slot. If I add the blessing of the goddess of magic, my spell slots should be more than a legendary wizard, right? The effect was quite good. Soren directly equipped the ring. As a divine artifact that provided additional spell slots, the overlapping effect of the ring was ineffective. This was because it was an energy deflection force field. It couldn't be stacked on 2 at the same time. Poison, disease, charm, and other abilities were also useless. Soren wasn't afraid of these things at all. Fortunately, the additional spell casting speed and magic resistance were useful. If he had better equipment in the future, he would consider giving it to Gloria and the others. Chapter 747. Report, report, report. The sound of hurried footsteps could be heard. Then a young boy rushed into the room in a panic, scaring the ugly monkey who was learning the common language. He looked up at the boy in front of him and glared at him angrily. Because the boy's father had helped him before, Ugly Monkey was too embarrassed to scold him too much. He could only scold him, "Why are you in such a hurry? What about your usual training? Are you going to be like this in the future?" You don't have any professional qualities of a rogue. Among the professions, being a rogue tested one's psychological quality the most, because good rogues were active in the front line, reconnaissance, assassination, exploration, and were born with short weapons in close combat. The professional characteristics of a rogue determined that they would encounter more dangerous things than other professions. A long time had passed in the blink of an eye. After Ugly Monkey graduated from the training camp of the Temple of Light, he began to lead a few disciples to teach the skills of a rogue. Although he was less than 20 years old today, Ugly Monkey spoke like an old man. He had high prestige among the younger generation of Mordor City. He was a rogue who was very likely to enter the realm of legends in Mordor City. Even the absolute ruler of Mordor City, His Excellency Sorin, knew his name. Ugly Monkey scolded a few words, and the young man in front of him blushed. After all, he was only 16 or 17 years old, and his psychological quality was not good enough. Ugly Monkey looked at him and sighed, then closed the book in his hand and said slowly, "What happened? Why are you in such a hurry?" After that, his face did not look very good, but it was not all because of the disciple in front of him. The disciple he taught was not good. At most, he would be laughed at by opponents of the same level. He could also say that the disciple's aptitude was not good. However, the higher-ups of Mordor City seemed to have lost their minds recently. They actually ordered all the leaders to start learning how to read and write. This was simply asking for his life. Now many old people in the management of Mordor City were complaining, especially those pirate leaders who could not read. They were so mad that they wanted to pull out their swords and cut people. But this was ordered by the mistress of Mordor City, Her Excellency Gloria. They had no choice but to memorize it because soon, the officials of the city hall would be responsible for assessing them. Although Ugly Monkey was very talented as a rogue, learning how to read was a little difficult. He did not have much talent in this area. When he thought about how he might fail the next exam, his face turned pale. Mordor City was ready to screen out better management. The most basic prerequisite for all of this was that these managers who might be promoted had to at least be able to read and write the common language. The reform of Mordor City was comprehensive. Now many managers were under a lot of pressure. Many people felt that they could not keep up with the development of Mordor City. The current situation was that even the giant, who hated reading and writing, was forced to hire a teacher to teach him how to read and write. That was because Her Excellency Gloria's request for him was to at least learn how to write his own name, as well as understand commonly used sentences. However, these were all orders from Sir Sorin. Because Sir Sorin himself was the most powerful rogue in the material plane, the requirements for rogues in the city of Mordor were higher. In addition to learning to read, the Ugly Monkey also had to learn arithmetic. "Go ahead." Ugly Monkey threw the book aside and said slowly, "What happened?" The young boy was still a little nervous, but he was much better. He quickly searched his body and handed over a small note that was sent back from the front. He stammered, "Fight. They're fighting. The surface elves and the drows are fighting." Ugly Monkey's gaze froze when he heard this. Although he was young, his hands were stained with blood. Recently, he had begun to take charge of the secret organization in the Wind Spear Hills. He had a powerful aura around him. Instantly, the young man in front of him was so scared that he did not even dare to breathe loudly. Ugly Monkey quickly glanced at the note, then said in a deep voice, "Send someone to the temple immediately. Pass down my order. Send a team to the Spider Forest to collect more detailed information." "Forget it. It's a big deal. I'll go to the temple to see the Archbishop myself. Also, you go and inform Lady Adele Isabella. The war between the drows and the surface elves will definitely affect a lot of places. Let her be prepared in advance." The movements of the elves were personally ordered by Sir Sorin to pay attention to. Ugly Monkey did not dare to be careless about this kind of thing. He rushed directly to the temple area and prepared to send the news back to Mordor through the temple. During this time, the movements of the elves had been strange. Although the outside world was not very clear about the reason, many people had noticed this. The news was sent back overnight. Just the afternoon before yesterday, there was a big battle near the Spider Forest. For thousands of years, the struggle between the surface elves and the drows had not stopped, but most of them were small-scale battles. Maybe the surface elves intended to clean up the drows, or maybe the drows were going to capture some surface elves to please the Queen of Spiders. Such things were very common. But the scale this time was a little scary. According to the information sent back from the outside, the army of the drows this time had reached more than 3,000 people. 3,000 people. That was the army of the Underdark, not the motley crew of the surface world. Chapter 748. The news was quickly sent to the city of Mordor through special channels. When the news was sent to Soren by magic, it was already noon the next day. At this time, Soren had already left the first town and arrived at a large city near the Gobi. The city was very old. Although it had been destroyed many times in history, it was finally rebuilt by the monks. Because this was an important stronghold for the monks, it was also one of the few places in the material plane where one could learn the sun flame style by conventional means. In the past, many adventurers who advanced to the monk level went here to practice, so that they could master the sun flame style and moon style after advancing to the legendary level. Soren's purpose here was to learn the expeditious steps. It was a special combat skill. After mastering it, one could get the additional ability of attack +2 and dodge +1. The eastern countries had a unique culture. On the other side of the continent, although the ability attack first could be trained, the actual combat effect was not as good as the footwork of the eastern countries. Soren definitely could not learn the sun flame style and the moon style, unless he planned to advance to the monk level and upgrade to the legendary level. However, some of the unique training methods of the monks could be mastered. The expeditious steps was also one of the special abilities. Other than that, in the eastern countries one could also train additional abilities such as rapid strike, sword draw, swift movement, and so on. This city was spoken in an Oriental language, and its name could be translated as the Boat of the Desert. This was the gathering place of the good and neutral monks of the order. They had been guarding the underground ruins where ancient evil creatures were sealed for generations. Because the teachings of the monks were quite special, there were many ascetic monks who had made a poverty oath here. They could almost be said to have no desire for material things. They were completely in pursuit of spiritual detachment. The population of this city was only about 50,000. Most of the cities in the eastern countries did not have a large population. Only near the fertile areas, there would be cities with more than 100,000 people. There were 3 monasteries in the ship of the desert. As soon as Soren arrived, he saw a group of dwarves. It was rare to see a bearded dwarf in the eastern kingdoms. Because the monk group of the desert boat accepted dwarves as monks, there was a special group of dwarven monks here. The dwarven monks with thick skin specialized in the diamond body. In the eastern kingdom they were the best meat shields. In the south of the city, there was a smithy called Broken Sword. This was one of the reasons why Soren was here, as there were many good things in this smithy. Opposite the blacksmith shop was a tavern. Standing at the door, one could see lazy dancers lying on the counter. This city didn't allow the establishment of brothels. Even the Eastern Empress wouldn't touch that bad luck. This was because the martial monks here were very strict. Many of them were the kind that didn't leave overnight wealth. If they brazenly opened a brothel here, it would be a slap in the face. As for whether there were any sexual activities going on in the dark corners, the martial monks' conclave wouldn't ask too much. After all, they couldn't ask ordinary people to strictly follow the teachings like the monks. The owner of the Broken Sword smithy was not eye-catching. He was just an ordinary middle-aged man. He looked quite strong. Usually he would just forge and drink. There were a few blacksmith apprentices under him. If Soren hadn't seen him in action before, he wouldn't have believed that this ordinary-looking middle-aged man was a high-level sword saint. "Sir, what would you like to order?" The middle-aged man in the smithy glanced at Soren and seemed to be uninterested. He said lazily, "We have all kinds of weapons here. If you need a different kind of weapon you can customize it. But the price is more expensive." There were many different kinds of weapons in the Eastern Kingdom. Some monks even used scythes as weapons. They looked a little like the Grim Reaper's scythe. Many monks chose to fight with their bare hands, so the business of the smithy wasn't very good. Soren couldn't stay in the Eastern Kingdom for too long because the second wave of the Abyss demons would soon arrive. So he went straight to the point and said, "I heard that you have some underground relics here. Do you want to sell them?" "I want to pick a few." The middle-aged man couldn't help but squint. He looked at Soren up and down and said, "Follow me." Crick. The middle-aged man walked into the room and opened a door. Then the entrance to the basement appeared in front of them. Soren quickly followed him. The basement was very spacious. On the left side were rows of weapon racks. On the right side it looked more like a garbage dump because there were all kinds of strange things. He was a sword saint from the lawful evil faction. His secret identity was the leader of a gray organization. Their organization often went against the rules to find treasures and underground relics that weren't allowed to enter. So it was possible to find some rare and good things here. Many underground relics had terrifying monsters sealed. The monks didn't like adventurers to disturb places where ancient evil creatures were sealed. However, many places where evil creatures were found were ruins of the arcane empire. There were a lot of valuable things in those places. So, some organizations would secretly explore those places. The monks couldn't do anything about it. Sometimes they had to clean up the mess for them. For example, recently, some bastard opened the seal of the relics and several magic sunflowers came out of the underground relics. Soren glanced at the items and started to look for something. With the advantage of foresight, Soren could find some good things in advance. However, with his current identity as a god, it was difficult to attract Soren's attention unless it was valuable enough. So, Soren found a broken mask from the garbage. The mask was made of bone and looked a little bit ferocious. The surface was severely damaged, but there was still some magic light left. How much is this? Soren picked up the mask and weighed it in his hand. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes and looked at it carefully. Then he said in a deep voice, 3,000 Kindler. What a ridiculous price. In the middle-aged man's mind, the mask was naturally not worth so much money. However, Soren didn't care. He directly took it, paid the bill, and left. He came here for this mask. Now that the mask was in his hand, Soren directly left the blacksmith shop. He was going to buy the book to learn expeditious steps from the black market. This mask was a legendary item. However, now that it was seriously damaged, it was quite troublesome to repair. A legendary item was not enough to make Soren come here in person. What was more valuable was the spell imprinted on the mask. Simulacrum, a level 8 spell? Of course. If it was called Simulacrum, it didn't sound like much. If it was called a temporary version of Avatar, it would be much more cool. Chapter 749. Soren only stayed here for half a day. After he got the item, he immediately began to track down the news of the birth of the artifact. He wanted to see if the artifact was the legendary Flail of Time. He could study the books about expeditious steps back in Mordor. However, Soren carefully observed the special mask for a long time because the spell engraved on it was really important. Wizards had an avatar-type spell. This spell was called Projection. It was a level 7 spell. After using it, a temporary avatar could be created. Depending on the mastery of the spell, the avatar could have about 50% to 60% of the power of the original body. In the case of using the projection spell, the original body could hardly move, and the consciousness would be transferred to controlling the avatar. Therefore, wizards rarely used this spell. Only when they were exploring some other planes would they send their avatars there. This spell had a lot of drawbacks, so wizards didn't use it much. However, this type of spell also had a black technology, which was a more advanced version of Simulacrum. It could create an avatar that was exactly the same as the original body, retaining about 70% of the power of the original body. Moreover, this avatar could use some of the low-level spells in his memory. Soren's purpose was to obtain the Simulacrum spell engraved on it. It was a spell that was almost lost, and it was the most powerful level 8 spell so far. Simulacrum had no casting restrictions. After creating a temporary avatar, the original body could also freely walk and cast spells, but the consciousness had to control both bodies at the same time. In other words, one had to do two things at once. This spell was very difficult to learn. At least wizards who didn't have enough brain power couldn't master this spell at all. Simulacrum was used on a large scale during the Iroquois Empire. Because the great arcanists had too many things to deal with, their original body couldn't spare time. Therefore, they began to study Simulacrum in depth and applied it in many aspects, including some temporary projection spells. This was actually the domain of the gods because the avatars of the gods had similar abilities. They also retained part of the original body's power and could use the original body's spells. During the Arcane Empire, the great arcanists who focused on research basically used Simulacrum to deal with many things. You might see a great arcanist temporarily teaching a class in the academy, but in fact his original body was still working in a laboratory. Those who could become arcanists were all people with outstanding intelligence. At the very least, they had the potential to become excellent scientists. The calculation and processing ability of the brain was amazing, and the speed of mental calculation was faster than other people using computers. This was the key to whether one could master simulacrum or not. If the calculation ability of the brain, controlling both the original body and the avatar, things would become messy. Soren definitely had the ability to create avatars. But to use this kind of ability from the perspective of a god, the price to pay was too high. The avatar was already. Unlike the avatar created by Soren, the avatar created by simulacrum was temporary, which meant that it would only take effect for the duration of the spell. When the spell's duration was up, the avatar would automatically disappear. The avatar crisis broke out. The things that Soren needed to deal with also increased on a large scale. Simulacrum was not only an advantage for him in battle, but it could also help him solve a lot of problems. Some of them were not so important that he needed to deal with them personally, but he couldn't completely ignore them. At this time, simulacrum was much easier. Soren directly cast a spell to create an avatar to deal with the problem. After dealing with the problem, the avatar would automatically disappear. Simulacrum created a temporary body, and the control was still the responsibility of the original body's consciousness. Note: the avatar created by simulacrum has the strength equivalent to 50% of the original body's slaughter EXP. That is to say, the avatar created by simulacrum has the same level as the original body's slaughter EXP. The higher the level of a wizard, the more slaughter EXP they need, and the more slaughter EXP they will have with simulacrum. If a wizard above level 30 uses simulacrum, then 50% of the slaughter EXP would be enough to create an avatar with the level of a wizard close to level 20. Under the night sky, Soren sat by the campfire and carefully interpreted the bone mask in front of him. There were countless extremely small spell circuits engraved on it. This was a supreme magic skill that was very difficult to master in this era. To enchant a level 8 spell on a piece of equipment, the number of basic skills needed to do this was a little too high. The spell circuits formed by simulacrum were more complicated than any spell that Soren had seen so far. Even legendary spells didn't have so many spell circuits. If simply using the amount of data, the number of spell circuits needed to form a level 8 simulacrum spell was about twice that of a legendary spell. However, Soren also had his own advantages. He was a god. This not only meant that his ability to understand was far beyond the understanding of mortals, but it also meant that he had mastered and used avatars. The avatar of a god was a natural ability. Under normal circumstances, Soren could automatically master the avatar ability in his divine form. When he needed to deal with material matters in his divine kingdom, he could create an avatar that had about 80% of his original power. If he finished dealing with the matter, the avatar could directly disappear. Soren was now trying to use his natural ability to decipher the simulacrum spell in front of him. The great arcanists had always been studying the power of gods, and because of this they were feared by the gods. Although Soren hadn't fully understood the structure of simulacrum, he could feel that this spell already involved the realm of gods. The purpose of this spell was to simulate the avatar ability of gods. To simulate the power of gods from a mortal's point of view. Soren studied it for a whole night. The more he studied, the more he was amazed by the wisdom of the great arcanists. It was like an ordinary scientist looking up to a scientist at the level of Einstein. The wisdom of these great arcanists was simply amazing. Even from the perspective of gods, Soren couldn't deny that these great arcanists were even better than gods in some areas. Looks like I still need Gloria's help. The sky was already bright. Soren put away the mask in his hand. There were too many complicated spell circuits on it, and it was impossible for him to decipher it in a short period of time by himself. Gloria and the Fallen Witch had to work together to help. Otherwise, who knew how long it would take Soren to decipher this spell? You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.